Scott just a minute if you want to be, I think she's going to have him start the. Karen's going to have Brent start the tape. It's 11:59. Do you want to? We're going to start at noon.
Okay.
Yep. I have noon if you're ready. We're on the record.
Okay, today is Monday, January 28th, 2019, and I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Tennessee Board of Accountancy. This regularly scheduled meeting is taking place in room 1B of the Davy Crockett Tower at 5500 James Robertson Parkway in Nashville, Tennessee. The meeting date, time, and location have been properly noticed, and copies of the agenda were posted to the Board of Accountancy website on January 25th, 2019. Wendy, would you please perform a roll call to determine that we have a quorum present?
Sure. Casey Stewart.
Present.
Stephen Eldridge.
Here.
Gay Moon.
Here.
Andy Bonner.
Here.
Janet Booker Davis. Pamela Church.
Here.
Larry Elmore.
Here.
Kevin Monroe.
Present.
Gabe Roberts is not present. Trey Watkins.
Here.
Judy Weatherby.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And Janet, I think, will be joining us in just a couple of minutes. She had an issue with parking, so just a couple of announcements. I don't know how many of you know, but Gabe Roberts was appointed by Governor Lee to serve as the Commissioner of TennCare. We had intended to congratulate him today, but unfortunately he couldn't be with us. And we don't know how this is going to affect his service on the board. I guess we'll ask him in May and see if he's going to be able to continue to serve or if some changes are needed there. I'd like to remind everyone to speak into the microphone so that we can hear you and your comments can be recorded. I would like to entertain a motion that we adopt Robert's Rules of Order for the meeting.
So moved.
Got a motion, a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I guess we need to have a roll call vote since Pam is on by phone. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You want to do that
Sure.
for us?
Bert,
Yay.
Stephen Eldridge.
Yes.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Trey Watkins.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. I hope everyone is okay with the change in our schedule. I talked with Wendy Friday afternoon, and the weather for tomorrow looked really iffy here in Nashville, and so we hurriedly did what we needed to do to be able to have this meeting, just move everything to today. And I'm going to ask the committee chairman to kind of lead the discussion of your area, just like you were in a committee meeting, but then we will vote as a board on the issues that we have to vote on. We need to review and adopt the agenda. I think everyone was previously furnished a copy of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions that anyone would like to make to that agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion. We adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Motion seconds. Any discussion? We'll need another roll call vote, please.
Bert,
Yes.
Stephen Eldridge.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Pam Church. Pam, if you're on mute, can you unmute?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Thank you. Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Trey Watkins.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Thank you.
Passes then. Okay, everyone was previously furnished a copy of the minutes, and let's note that Janet Booker Davis is joining us for the meeting, and previously furnished a copy of those minutes. Are there any corrections, additions, or deletions to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion that the minutes be approved as presented.
So moved.
Need a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, we'll have another roll call vote, please.
Stewart,
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge,
Aye.
Gay Moon, Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
Larry Elmore, Kevin Monroe,
Aye.
Trey Watkins,
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion.
Motion has been approved, and the minutes are approved. Wendy, I believe the next item on our agenda is the director's report. I think everybody was furnished a copy of your written report, but would you like to make some comments or summarize the report, please?
Yes. The first item on the report are future meeting dates. All of the dates in black are already approved dates, and then I have a proposal for May 5th of 2020 as the next meeting to be approved. So we'll need a vote on that. Do you want to do that now or wait till the end?
We can go ahead and do that now. Entertain a motion that we approve the May 5th, 2020 date for future meeting in May.
So moved.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion of the motion? Okay, we'll let you do a roll call vote, please.
AC Stewart,
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge,
Aye.
Gay Moon,
Aye.
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe,
Aye.
Trey Watkins,
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay, for the rest of the report, NASBA meetings is the next item on there. The annual meeting, NASBA's annual meeting was held in October. Casey, Andy, Janet, and myself attended. And there were topics, you can see on the report there, some of the topics that were covered. The upcoming meetings related to NASBA, we have an ED, Executive Director and Legal Conference in March. Sherry and Legal Counsel will join me. And Western Regional meetings are listed there, and the annual meeting for 2009 are also listed. I believe at the Eastern Regional, Janet has indicated her interest in attending, and of course Andy will be attending as a member of the Board of Directors. So if anyone else wants to add their name, just let me know on that. Active exposure drafts. So there are 2 exposure drafts that have been released related to the UAA model rules. The first one is for continuous testing. The comments on that are due February 11th of 2019. We are going to talk about that in the law and rules. So if there are any comments we want to make or suggest, we can talk about that there. There's also peer review changes, and those are fairly significant changes to Article 7. So those comments are not due until June. I have not had a chance to fully review that, so I plan to do that between now and the next meeting and make a presentation on. I would like to make comments, we can do that. The CPA Evolution Working Group. So you all know that we've talked about the previous idea of a separate pathway to becoming a CPA, and that when presented didn't go over very well. So basically they decided to take a seat with that, but to create this evolution working group to kind of analyze how technology is impacting the profession and how the profession might want to move forward over the short term and long term. So a group has been put together. They have had a couple of meetings, and we should hear some recommendations from them later in 2019, probably around the regional meetings, but maybe even later than that. So there's some pretty, we know some people on that group. I think one of Kevin's partners has been appointed to that group. the evolution working group. My counterpart from Kansas is on that group. There's some other, it's failing me who else is on that group, but there are some good people in that group to help. The CPE tracker and audit tool, I have actually, since I wrote this director's report, I have some updated information. So we have scheduled training. This is going to go live as predicted. We do have some training scheduled. Leanne is supposed to be back with us from maternity leave on April 1st. So I tried to postpone the training until she got back. So we're doing it, I believe, on the 4th. And then we will release the login information to all CPAs once the board staff has had training. So that will happen in April sometime. I may wait until after the 15th to send that out to everybody. And that'll give CPAs a chance to create their logins, or if they've already been part of the tracker, they're going to be able to log in and see the information that they had previously loaded on the old platform. So the other thing to add about this is TSCPA has agreed to feed their attendance records into this new platform. So if you take something from TSCPA, those documents will automatically show up in your account. So it should make it easier on licensees. So excited to see that work. CPE notification. We have drafted a notification to all licensees about the board's decision at the last meeting to require a listing of your continuing education courses at renewal beginning in 2019. So that's been approved by legal. I was trying to wait till we had most of these renewals done, but I didn't want to confuse people. So we're looking to send that out in the next couple of weeks once we're through the end of January, which is the grace period for renewing your license without penalty. So we will send that out in the next couple of weeks. We are going to do that via email to all of the licensees that we have email, and then we'll send something via mail, post to our website. Only mail to those people we do not have an email address. Then we will post on the website, put it in our newsletters, also ask TSCPA to help us get the word out on that. TSCPA activities, I've just listed there several meetings that I've attended. I've gone along with Brad and Mark Stedman, the current chair of TSCPA, and they've allowed me to give a 10-minute update of activities of the board. I think some of you have been, Stephen was at West Tennessee, Trey was at Memphis when I was there a few weeks ago. So the only other item there not related to that was TSCPA's Discover Accounting program. Larry actually went with me there, and that is a program in which they introduce the profession to high school students and try to give them an overview and encourage them to consider the profession benefits that it provides them. Licensing and case complaint metrics, I've added these to the back. I did this for the first time at the last meeting, just so you all could see what our goals were and where we stood. What I've attached is December metrics, and if you'll recall, the goal for licensing time is to license quicker than we did the prior year. You'll see with December we were a little behind. Without looking specifically into it, I suspect that the renewals and being down a staff person has caused us to just be a little bit behind where we normally are. I did note that October and November we were at 5 and 6 days respectively. So that's typically we're anywhere between 5 and 11 or 12 days on licensing time. With regards to complaints, we attempt to resolve complaints within 100 days of being filed, and our goal is 90% of the time that happens. So I think we are in line there. In regards to renewals, of course, we are at the end of renewal season, and I gave you some statistics there about where we stand. We do a mailer in November. We follow that up with several emails to encourage folks to renew. A $100 late fee will be assessed at the end of January for anybody who has not renewed. And you can see from the stats there, we're currently at about 652 individuals who've not renewed and 159 firms. they will get another piece of information in the mail once that late fee hits.
Wendy, it looks like we're running just below 10% that are not renewed on time. I remember that's very much in line with what the other states in our region experience.
Yes, and I actually compared to last year's number. I mean, it's just almost dead exact. It seems like it's the same every single year. So yeah, we're trending like we normally do, and like other states tend to report. With regards to new licenses issued, the item I think is important here to note is that our total for 2018 was 608 new licenses, which was up from 2017. If you'll remember, 2017 is when the new exam was released, so we did see a little bit of a downturn there. And we're still behind 2016, but at least we're seeing some greater numbers there as far as licenses issued. And then at the end of the report, you'll see total licensing population for individuals and firms. That concludes my report. If there are any questions.
Hey, Wendy, quick question on the training y'all are going to have in mid-March on the CPE tracker.
Yes.
Would it be possible for me to attend that?
I can certainly check. We're going over to NASBA's office for it.
Okay.
And so sure.
I wouldn't have access to it.
Yeah, you won't have access.
So that would be good, just so
Yeah.
I am kind of staying up on what it
Sure.
is. Okay.
Any other questions or comments on Wendy's report? Okay, the next item on our agenda is I guess, peer review program presentation, and Richard Hill is here with us today to handle that. And Richard, I really don't know you, don't know that I've met you before. You might want to introduce yourself or give us a little background as you start off here. But
Apologize for interrupting, but I'd like to do one thing real quickly before we have Richard start. Tony has joined us quickly, and I believe he wants to. I think we are going to introduce our new legal counsel just for a couple of minutes, and then so they don't have to sit through the next hour or so. We can do that real quickly if you don't mind.
I do mind. I don't want to do that. I'm kidding. No, you go right ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate you all giving us the opportunity to interrupt you just for a moment. Again, for the audience, I'm Tony Glandorf. I'm the Chief Counsel for Regulatory Boards. It's good to see you all here this morning. I'm here to introduce to you all Ms. Maria Bush. She is our newest attorney that's for Regulatory Boards Division. Today is her first day, so she just came out of the HR, so very much fresh to the department. She is a recent graduate of the Belmont Law School. In 2018, we hired her in order to, as part of her duties, to be the board attorney for the accountancy board. So her duties and responsibilities will go to, as Sarah is sitting here, to give you all legal advice as to the board issues. I will be supervising her. I'll continue on to do that, and I'll be here for the next several meetings to go through that with you all as we do the on-the-job training and the onboarding process as we do. So I'm very excited to introduce you to her. We had a really great interview with her. She is a very proactive person, very much. She has a lot of forethought in what she does, and with the people that I spoke to on the phone that recommended her, she is a very good human being and individual. And the stories that they told me, which I will not repeat to you all, she could tell you those, is that she has done all she can to help out her family and friends. So Maria, do you have anything that you would like to say? I'll give you the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be working with. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that way everybody can hear. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Again, sorry for interrupting the meeting. I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Questions of me that I could answer?
We're an easy bunch, so it should be easy.
Thank you all. Somebody. Thank you.
I keep getting this reaction. No.
And Sarah, you told them about your transition?
I've told Kevin.
Oh, okay. So, unfortunately, I found out last week that Sarah Page has been offered a position, and she has accepted a position as the attorney for the Rutherford County School Systems. So that I think is a great responsibility. I think it's one that I think I would have difficulty doing because I think they probably deal with some very sensitive, large issues. But Sarah Page is going to be phenomenal in doing that. I want to tell you all, Sarah, you on the record in front of the board, that you have done an amazing job here, and I appreciate everything that you have done in giving legal advice and in providing them with direction and guidance, and also for assisting and helping out your peers who have been on this board. Liz, who recently left which puts me in a little bit of a bind, but we will absolutely make it. But you've been a hard charger, and since you have come onto the department to where we are right now, the work effort that you have done has raised the bar in the legal division, and I appreciate you for that. I hate to tell you all that she's leaving, but I did not run her out. She was given a great opportunity. So
we hate to see you go, Sarah. You've been very, very helpful to us and helping us develop those metrics, and you've really gone over and above what is expected, I think, and very much appreciated.
I'm going to miss you guys a lot.
I thought you were going to stay with fictitious names research.
I'm sure it'll help me with students get very creative on tests.
So Tony, do the other boards have we do, or is it just us?
when it's the same attorney, so they have multiple boards, I would say yes. So if there's multiple impacts. So there's Liz was also on the Architects and Engineering Board and the Motor Vehicle Commission, so it impacted their board also. Sarah does work with the Motor Vehicle Commission. She had previously with the Architects and Engineering Board. I had to reassign that to Ashley Gino, who's sitting back here. So I'm sure you're absolutely just waiting to hear about her representation on the legal report. Has taken over the Architects and Engineering Board. So there's a little bit of overlap that we've had in there. I will tell you all that other boards are affected also. I would say that the turnover, as I've seen it, is that our talent is getting recruited outside elsewhere for taking on jobs of different levels of responsibility, either within the industry or going somewhere else. It's a really good economy out there. When I started back in 2009, I worked here for free as a clerk for 3 years, and I thought that was the greatest thing. And then they actually started paying me one day, and it was awesome. But it's a different story nowadays. So the economy is really good out there. So there's a lot of other people that are looking out there getting talent. And I like to say that we recruit really good talent that comes in here, and so they are sought after. Unfortunately, so I will tell you all that. From the meetings that I've gone to with Big DOHR, with the state, we're lucky if we keep our attorneys here 2 or 3 years is usually the normal process on norm. That's what they say to look out for the future. So I'd like to have them, 3, 4, 5, 6 years and let everybody work into a managerial position. Some of those are a little bit limited, and so we try to make it so that we have cover down on the boards to give you all legal advice. So I am here. I will be able to assist. We rarely have 2 people leave at the same time because that's some institutional knowledge that's difficult to hack. But I think so far as this board, we're going to be okay and covered down because we have other people still within the department who have provided you all with advice before so that we can keep track of those issues and what we've done.
Just say that, Sarah, we really appreciate all you've done, and it's I know I've felt that way, and it's encouraging to see others speak up and say that, and we truly wish you the best in your new career. So, yeah.
Also reconsider if you'd like. We can keep this going here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I knew that was coming up. Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Wendy, can we now go to
Yes, but I would also, just so I don't interrupt anymore, just let you all know that Art Sparks is also on the phone related to this presentation, so he will be available for questions as well. So just wanted to let you all know that. Sorry, Richard. No.
Well, I'm done. Wendy's going to give me the hook at 1 hour, so I'm mindful of that. I'm Richard Hill. I'm a partner with Mitchell, Emmer & Hill, a CPA firm in Knoxville. I've first became qualified to be a peer reviewer in 1992. Since then, our firm's done a number of peer reviews each year. I came on the TSCPA peer review committee. In 2011, I was appointed to the AICPA peer review board. I ended up serving a total of 5 years in 2 different terms there, and I'm still on several task force that are associated with the peer review board. So I feel very fortunate to have a pretty broad knowledge of peer review, and so I'm happy to have the opportunity to come talk to the board about that. So we've got a presentation. I'm going to try to manage all this technology. I want to say at the onset, any comments are just my personal opinion. They're not official views of the AICPA or TSCPA, either one. So I thought we'd start first with just a brief history recap. In the late 1980s, the AICPA the membership passed peer review, and it was just a membership requirement at that time. It was to be educational and remedial and not punitive. So even 30 years later, that's still the underlying principle of peer review, is that it's educational and remedial. The TSCPA administers the AICPA peer review program using the AICPA peer review program standards. Tennessee is one of 31 administering entities throughout the country that administer peer review in 50 states and 5 territories. The peer review program is overseen by the peer review board and various committees and task forces who set the standards and provide guidance for everything to do with peer review throughout the country. I think Tennessee's been very fortunate to have a pretty strong presence nationally. Brad Floyd and Bob Weatherly and Art Sparks have been on the peer review board before I was. Art remains as a member of the National Peer Review Committee. Ethan Miller from Chattanooga is a current peer review board member. In addition, Kara and Katie, who handle the administrative aspects of the program, have been very instrumental in some nationwide initiatives of the peer review program. So I think Tennessee's pretty well represented in the peer review program. Here's some statistics on enrollment. A couple of things I wanted to point out. Down at the bottom, 2008. That fairly low number, that was when the State Board of Accountancy still had its quality review program. In 2008, that program was discontinued, so 330 firms that were formerly enrolled in quality review as administered by this board then had to enroll in the TSCPA, AICPA peer review program. So that's why those numbers spiked up 2009, 10, and 11. I'll kind of jump in here and mention that my personal opinion, the elimination of that quality review program was a good thing, because firms could, in theory, be a part of the AICPA, TSCPA peer review program. At the time, you could go 3 cycles of peer reviews before you sent for termination. So that was 3 3-year periods, 9 years, another year to go through the hearing panel process. Then if they were terminated from that program, they could come enroll in your all's program and then start that whole cycle again. So a firm could conceivably do 20 years of poor quality work before they were finally out of both programs. So by eliminating the quality review program, that cut that down from 20 to 10. And today, through other changes in peer review standards, it's actually down to about 4 or 5. It could be down as low as 2 or 3 years. So it's AICPA is much more responsive now where firms struggle with quality work. You'll see as the trend as you go through the years, the number keeps dropping. I think that's just mergers and acquisitions, the same thing we see. SARS 21 under the state law, if a firm only does preparation engagements, they're not subject to peer review. And so those firms, you won't see those in. Here's the structure of the peer review program. A new position this year is the CPA on staff. That came out of an initiative from the ICPA and the peer review board. We wanted to have one person that was in charge of the program at each administering entity. So that position was newly created. And to help the administering entities who didn't have a CPA that could step into that role, we allowed a 3-year waiver. It's a 1-year waiver 3 times for AEs that didn't have a CPA that could step into that role. Tennessee was fortunate that Kara Fitzgerald was already on staff and as a CPA and could be the CPA on staff. And she got some experience in administering the program when Katie was out on maternity leave. So she's not just, she doesn't have that title, so she's actually involved in the program. So we're one of those AEs that already have that CPA on staff field. So that's that, and then the administrators, Katie and Caroline, handle the scheduling the reviews, the following up, the preparation for the meetings. There's a technical reviewer. Tennessee, again, is fairly fortunate in the last 25 or so years. We've only had 2 primary tech reviewers. Current one is Art Sparks, who's on the phone, who's going to watch what I say and make sure I don't misspeak, I hope. Then there's backup tech reviewers in the cases where Art has a conflict, then one of the backup tech reviewers step in, and that is the 3 report acceptance body chairs. And finally, the committee on the right-hand side, those are 18 members that are chosen annually. They're divided up into 3 report acceptance bodies, East, Middle, and West. We do that by geography, trying to minimize the risk of a review going to a section of the state where there's a potential conflict. So if I'm a peer reviewer in East Tennessee, I review a firm that's in Middle Tennessee, the odds are that review will go to West Tennessee just to avoid any potential conflicts. If there's a conflict, obviously the committee member will step aside, but we think separating the state and that geography helps reduce that risk. And I think I mentioned, but anytime y'all have questions, please stop me. I've got a lot of material, so I'm going to move through it pretty quickly. Here's the structure again, the CPA on staff. These are the requirements that each one of those positions have to have. The CPA on staff, the RAB members, the tech reviewer. It's not on this slide, but peer reviewers also have to have qualifications. You have to take the initial training course. You have to do certain ongoing training. And if you peer review a must-select engagement, which we'll touch on in just a moment, you have to have even more training on top of that. All this is monitored first by the administering entity and second by the AICPA using a variety of methods to make sure that the folks that are doing all these functions are qualified. Well, here are the steps in a peer review process, and let's again start back at the beginning, so to speak. So a firm that's been enrolled in peer review on an ongoing basis, their review is due 3 years and 6 months from the year end of their previous peer review. And so in my firm, for instance, we have a March 31st year end, March 31st, 2018. And so our next review is due 3 years, 6 months from that date. If a firm's just enrolled, then that due date is 18 months from the date that they've enrolled. Reviews, there are 2 different types of reviews. There's an engagement review available generally to firms that don't do audit work. And so it's just, as its name describes, 1, 2, 3, 4, depends on circumstances. Number of engagements are sent to the peer reviewer. It's all done off-site. Peer reviewer looks at it, issues a report that says those engagements conform with the standards or they didn't conform with the standards. Very simple, very narrow in scope. If a firm does at least 1 audit, then you have a system review. As its name implies, you look at the system of quality control. And so you're looking at CPE records, you're looking at their quality control document, you're looking at a variety of information, including engagements, seeing whether or not their system of quality control works. So I just kind of wanted to frame that so you'd understand that part of peer review. So it's time for a firm to get a peer review. They go into the peer review information management application, nicknamed Prima. That's been out about 2 years. If you've heard things about it, they may not have been all that complimentary. It had a rough rollout, but it has made vast improvements in the 2 years it's been out. It's self-service. The firms go in and put their own information in. It's a vast improvement over the old software that we were using. So a firm goes in and selects a peer reviewer, schedules their review. That reviewer has to be a match. They have to have the right amount of experience or the right type of experience to be a peer to that firm, or the scheduling process can't go forward. Then the firm gets information, the firm sends information to the reviewer. The reviewer selects the engagements, performs the review, then comes and uploads those documents once again through Prima. There's an administrative review that's done by Katie or Caroline. They're making sure the name's right, the dates are right, that you've uploaded all the forms that you should have uploaded. From there, it goes to the technical review, and in most cases, that's Art, who looks to see if the standards have been followed. So is the report right? Is the conclusion make sense? Do your documents all tie together? Do they hang together? And if he has questions, then he sends them back to the reviewer for the reviewer to make revisions if necessary. Once he's done, it goes to a report acceptance body, commonly referred to as a RAB. And then 4 RAB members. The minimum is 3. We always try to have 4. Sometimes it's everybody that's on that RAB we'll look at a review depending on the complexity of it. And then that RAB will vote to accept the review or to not accept that review. So by the time it leaves the reviewer's hand, it's gone through a tech reviewer and 3, 4, or more RAB members for us all to evaluate what the peer reviewer has done and the conclusions that they've put in their report. There's a rule, the 60, 120-day rule that you see down there. If an engagement review comes in with no significant issues on review engagements, our requirements is those have to be accepted within 60 days. Everything else, 120 days. It has to be presented to the RAB in that time period. That keeps the process moving. And so that's something the administering entity has to make sure that happens. Once it goes to the report acceptance body, again, if a member on that RAB has a conflict, they recuse themselves. If they've performed the prior review or they were a review team member, they disconnect from the call. They leave the room if it's an in-person meeting because we don't want the appearance of any. They're not a part of that acceptance. If it's a past report, for the most part, the review's closed out. Letters are sent, congratulations, we'll see you in 3 years and 6 months. If it's something other than a past report, there's usually corrective action that the firm needs to complete, and we'll touch on that here in just a few minutes. These are the various stages. I think I've covered that. The reviewer is approved. The timeliness is monitored. If a firm doesn't cooperate with the peer reviewer, doesn't send them the information they need, won't respond to matters or findings, then they are put on clock, so to speak. They've got a certain amount of time to respond, and if they don't, then they'll be sent to Durham, the AICPA, to be considered to be terminated from the program because that's not cooperating if you won't cooperate with the peer reviewer. Reviewers are under similar scrutiny. If you don't do what you're supposed to do timely, then you can be suspended from performing peer reviews. You're locked out until you do that one review that's got a timing issue. So we're very sensitive to timing and making sure that reviews get through the process smoothly. Touch briefly on must select engagements. Those are Yellow Book, audits done under government auditing standards, employee benefit plan audits, SOC engagements, and certain fiducia engagements. Those have a high public interest, and so if a firm does even one of those, it must be selected as part of peer review. And that is, again, that's been around for a number of years. Peer reviewers who look at must select engagements have to have additional training because those are more complicated than other type engagements. And finally, down at the bottom, there are 3 different reports that a peer reviewer can issue: pass, pass with deficiencies, and fail. Wendy and I were talking briefly before the meeting. Pass with deficiencies, if somebody reads that and sees the word pass and stops, that could be misconstrued because there's pass, there's fail, and if you have a deficiency, then it's a pass with deficiency. That's not a pass report. It's not the type of report anybody wants to see. So that's the 3 categories of reports. I put in my notes here, I did want to mention this because we get these questions a lot, this specific question a lot. It's possible in a system review for a firm to have a non-conforming engagement. They didn't do an audit right, they missed a review or a compilation, and they could still get a pass report. The reason for that is because the report's focused on the firm's system of quality control. So if they just made a mistake on one engagement, but it was isolated and it wasn't systemic, then the standards allow that they would still get a pass report in some circumstances. That complicated than I would necessarily want to get into, but sometimes we'll hear that, well, I don't understand, they got in trouble with the DOL or the comptroller's office, and how's it they get a pass report? It depends. If that's their only engagement, they may not get one. They shouldn't get one. But it's possible. So I wanted to mention that. Here's some statistics for 2018. We had 183 peer reviews that were accepted. 131 of those were passed. 23 were passed with deficiency, and 29 were fail. The pass rate being right at 72%. %72 is lower than it's been in years past. When I first went on the peer review board, that number was in the high 80s, if not the low 90s. I don't think the quality of work has changed all that much. I think peer reviews become more aware of what the documentation standards are, and we've identified some peer reviewers that needed some better training. And so 72% of those are passed. That's pretty comparable to the national averages. For engagement reviews, one of the top issues that we see are SARS-21 issues. They don't update the report. So you might imagine if you're looking at an engagement, the report's not right, then it's a non-conforming engagement. And stunningly, however many years it's been since SARS 21's been issued, there's still a lot of firms missing that. The last few that I've done, I've noticed some firms don't document inquiries made on review engagements, which there are only a handful of procedures you do on review engagements, but documenting inquiries and management's one of those, and if that's not done, it's a non-conforming engagement. On the audits, there are really three areas that are tripping a lot of firms up that are causing something other than a pass report. Those are yellow book independence issues. There's been a great deal of emphasis on that. That independent standard's been out since 2011, and still that issue comes up time and again. Firms just don't understand what's required to document independence considerations on Yellow Book. Just general documentation requirements. I think if you go back years ago, peer reviewers probably were guilty of giving partial credit. If a firm got most of the documentation in there, and then you could go talk to them, and they'd say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Here's how I assess risk, or here's the procedures I did. Then as peer reviewers, it was easy to say, well, you knew what you were doing. Let's move on. And the standard should have been, was it properly documented or not? It doesn't matter what they can tell you that they did. The auditing standards don't give you partial credit. You either documented it or you didn't. And then the third area, kind of a new area in the last 6 or 8 months, is risk assessment. There's been a lot of discussion at the national level where some risk assessment's not being done correctly. So I think that's another thing that leads firms to receive something other than a pass report. If a firm doesn't get a pass report, they get a PWD or a fail, then here's some common corrective actions. They can agree to pre-issuance or post-issuance review of one or more engagements by an outside party. They can submit proof of CPE. If somebody misses SARS 21, it may be that they never took a class on it, so the RAB would probably ask them to take a class on SARS 21 and provide proof that was done. There could be some remediation of non-conforming engagements. 10 years ago, if peer review found an engagement not done correctly, then the firm would say, well, we'll catch it the next time, and that was okay. But today, that's not acceptable. We want to see that that engagement is remediated, because the firm should want to go out and remediate that engagement. And then the last on this list is a team captain revisit. So depending on the circumstances, the RAB may ask that the team captain go back into the firm, perform not a full-blown peer review, but selected procedures, look at selected items within that firm to see how the firm's improved since the last review. Big area of concern with peer review and with regulators: what information can be shared. So this is built into the standards. It was built in when the program was adopted in the late 80s. It was maintained to be a confidential program, but what can be made public: the firm's enrollment status, the year end of the firm's most recently accepted peer review report, and acceptance date of the most recent peer review report. And in Tennessee, if the peer review, you can find out the peer review report rating if the review is scheduled on June 1st, 2018 or later. Some of you may know that's due to a change in state law. Tennessee was one of the few states that would not allow the Board of Accountancy to see the report rating. That was built into the law. That law was changed 2 or 3 years ago to be more like all but maybe 1 or 2 other states that had that in place. So a couple of years ago, I think the last year I was on the board, questions came up about, well, a firm needs to tell an outside party more about their peer review, so how can we help a firm do that? Because a lot of times, and I'll use the comptroller's office as an example, or maybe the Board of Accountancy, they want to know what's going on with your peer review, and so the firm would say, I don't know, I've done everything they want me to do, or some vague comments. So the peer review board passed an interpretation that allowed certain other information to be shared if the firm agrees to it and the firm asks that that be shared. So on this slide are some examples of that. It has to be quantifiable information. It can't be, is the firm cooperating, or is the firm do okay during that year, or something like that. It's got to be just a handful of very quantifiable things that you can share about a firm. That's still a new process. There's a form out that they'll fill out with Katie and Kara's assistance, but there's a little bit more that a firm can tell an outside party about their peer review. Questions? Again, I know I'm going through it quickly, but I'm mindful of your time. So any questions on anything I've covered so far? Yes, sir.
Couple questions. Can you give us a breakdown of kind of the proportion of the systems peer reviews that are being done in Tennessee versus the engagement review?
I think it's about half and half or less, but I'm going to turn and look toward Katie and Karen in the hopes they might know.
I'm not sure.
The reason I ask is because when we get to the legal report, consistent with our prior meetings, we have a lot of folks that are issuing review level engagements that are not enrolled in peer review and don't know that they should be. And so we'll be looking for maybe some troubleshooting strategies on that to head that off at the pass here.
The last number I remember hearing, and don't hold me to this, but it's something like 12 or 13,000 system reviews out of 25,000 firms nationwide.
Okay.
I would say somewhere in the 50% range. In my experience, it seems like I do more engagement reviews than system reviews, but that may not be typical.
Thank you.
Any other questions? One of the new initiatives at AICPA is the evolution of peer review administration. It started, I mentioned I went on the board in 2011, but in 2010, the peer review board had been having discussions about consistency and efficiency and effectiveness, especially with the change in technology. And so it was talked about a little bit in 10 and 11, then it was kind of put on the back burner, but it was brought back up again in maybe 2013 and 14. And so when I first went on the board in 2011, there were 43 administering entities that administered peer review throughout the country in the 5 territories. Now there are 31. So I think some smaller states, for the most part, are finding out that the peer review administration is more complicated than they want to devote the resources to, and so they are transitioning that administration to another AE, another society, to administer peer review for them. When we did observations of RAB meetings, this report acceptance body, it certainly showed that there's some inconsistency, but you think there's 43 administering entities, there's 55 states and jurisdictions, there's hundreds of volunteers. Consistency would be very, very difficult. The Oversight Task Force that I'm still a member of, one of the charges even back when Bob was on the board in the 90s or early 2000s, that group went out and visited all these different administering entities in a 2-year period, and you generally made sure they were doing things pretty consistently, but we've just seen the greater consistency is out there. So we're trying to do that, and we think maybe evolution was the way to handle that. This was thrown out, and maybe it's been worked on at least 2 years, maybe 3. The first version of this was based on what they called inputs. So they said, you need a full-time CPA on staff, you need this kind of staff, you need to have report acceptance body meetings every 2 weeks. It was very much on the input side. And then through discussions with societies and with other folks that are interested in this, decided that was the wrong focus. We need to look at the outputs. And so rather than how you staff, we just want to know that you're hitting your marks, that you're complying with all the standards and guidance. So out of that came the CPA on staff. Another part that came out was a familiarity threat. All AEs now have to have policies about how they manage familiarity threat. I'll touch on that again in just a moment. Benchmarks have been a buzzword for the last probably 2 years. I've been on a group that's developing those. We're currently in a pilot phase for benchmarks, but TSCPA is one of 4 administering entities in the country that are piloting those benchmarks and having influence and refining what those should look like. And so I think that's good, again, taking a leadership role in there. So July 1st, 2019 is when those benchmarks should be effective. In the unlikely event an administering entity doesn't meet those consistently, then actually the peer review board on Wednesday will approve what are called fair procedures. What are you going to do with an administering entity that can't consistently meet these benchmarks? Discuss that on Wednesday. My personal opinion, I don't really see those coming into play. I think if an AE is struggling to administer the program right, they're going to not want to continue to do it. But that's all just speculative at this point. Talk about oversight. So I mentioned briefly that the Oversight Task Force, one of the 3 standing task forces of the board, goes out and visits administering entities. They do enhanced oversights and RAB observations. We'll touch on all that. So RAB observations came about in 2014, I believe. In Tennessee, we had 3 of our 17 meetings that were observed. That's done by the technical managers at the AICPA. So these are folks whose full-time job it is to write the standards, interpret the standards, answer questions about it, implement it. They're extremely knowledgeable. All the staff over there in peer review just do a great job. So they sit in on the RAB meeting. They're trying to see if the RABs are adhering to the standards and doing corrective action and feedback when they should. Are they showing any familiarity bias, or are they not as tough on a reviewer that may be a committee member or for some reason a high volume reviewer? And what about timeliness? They're looking at all that. Most of these RAB observation reports have comments. Very rarely, like 1 out of 10 is going to be my guess. Does a technical manager observe a RAB meeting in the country and not have some comment for something the RAB could do better? There's our educational comments. They're meant to help make RABs better, and over the 3 or 4 years those have been done, the RABs have gotten much better. So I think that's been very effective. There's also administrative oversights. Every other year, a member of the Oversight Task Force goes out and visits the administering entity, looks at policies, procedures, a number of documents, looks at reviews that have been accepted to see if the right decision was made, look at reviews that are going to the next meeting and actually sits in and participates in that meeting to see if the right decisions are made, see if the right feedback's handled. And this oversight report then is available on the AICPA website and the TSCPA website once it's done. I think for 2018, the report was issued, had no comments. I believe the one before that, and possibly the one before that, had no comments. So again, that shows the level that Tennessee, the TSCPA, is operating at when you're getting that outside evaluation of how you handle the peer review program. One of the rules, you don't visit your own state, so I wouldn't ever do Tennessee's visit. You don't go to the same AE 2 times in a row. So we try to mix it up. And I thought driving down here this morning, I actually think Tennessee's probably not had the same person back in the Oversight Task Force rotates folks around. So that's one way the AICPA staff can monitor from Durham using Prima and see if letters are going out on time. They can look at follow-up. You don't have to be physically in the society's office like you did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Talked about benchmarks. Again, this was launched in 2018 as part of the Enhancing Audit Quality Initiative. There's quarterly reporting that's being done. There are about 30 or 40 steps on this benchmark report that are down to, do you close reviews on time? Do you get that 60 or 120 day presentation date? Do you hit that? And if you don't, how many did you not get presented to the RAB in that date? Just a variety of factors that we've identified as being critical to the administration of the program. And then fair procedures, that last bullet on this page, fair procedures coming for AEs that can't meet the benchmarks. Talk about familiarity. The TSCPA adopted a policy in 2018 about familiarity. Something the peer review board wants everybody to have a policy as to how they deal with familiarity. And that's defined as familiarity between RABs and reviewers, RABs and firms, peer reviewers and firms, tech reviewers. I mean, all of us all together. You've got to be mindful. And knowing Art's on the phone, I'll make a comment that he and I have had numerous conversations about. There's good familiarity and there's bad familiarity. Bad familiarity is when you say, well, I think that peer reviewer missed this, but you know they teach that class or they do a lot of employee benefit plan audits, so we're going to let it go and assume that they probably handled it well. And that's somewhat human nature. We really have to be on guard about that. That's bad familiarity. Good familiarity is this reviewer usually struggles to assess risk properly, so we're going to pay extra attention on their reviews to make sure they've done that. Or over a pattern looking at this particular reviewer, they write a lot of matters. And so we think that this should have been a matter. They've never shown a hesitancy to write one before. So there's both good and bad familiarity. We're mostly concerned with the bad kind. Probably another good opportunity. People sometimes perceive that the committee members are all, we've served together for a long time and that there's some friendship among us that would some way color the work that we do. and nothing could be further from the truth. If anything, I think the committee is harder on fellow committee members because we have to be. We can't allow the perception that we're not harder on people that we know than on people we don't know. And so we are, in my opinion, very tough on each other. When I was chair many years ago, I got an email from a firm that said, well, my peer reviewer didn't do a very good job, but I don't expect you're going to do anything about it because he's a committee member and you all take care of each other. And so in consulting with Wendy, who was the administrator at that time, in our tech review, I wrote back and said, it goes through tech review, it goes through 4 RAB members, but if you're not comfortable, you let me know and we'll send it to another state. And we'll let another state tech review it, we'll let another state accept it if you're alleging that we're being biased, because we're not. So things like that just to me reinforce that we just can't allow that to happen. It would really undermine the whole program. So we're aware of that. We work hard not to show bias. I'm aware of one firm, a high volume reviewers firm, whose peer review was accepted recently, and the AE actually brought in somebody from another state that didn't know the firm, didn't know anybody, to sit in on that one firm's acceptance just to show that there was no bias from anybody. They were brought in solely for that reason. And I think that'll be the model that we'll use in the future for that. At high volume reviewers, committee members, a lot of us have known each other, been on RABs together for years, but we can't allow that bias to creep in. We work very diligently. I think you really undermine the program if you start allowing that to happen. Next, I want to talk about enhanced oversight. I was chair of the Oversight Task Force of the Peer Review Board when this was launched in 2014. I told the conference that year it was administratively challenging, but it was brutally effective. And it was both. We got the administrative part kind of worked out, but here just generally are the objectives of the Enhanced Oversight Program. We're looking just at must-select engagements. So those are those engagements that have a high public interest to them, Yellow Book, Employee Benefit Plan primarily. We want to identify material departures from professional standards. At one point, we hope to give peer reviewers back feedback on some minor things we saw that would help them be better peer reviewers. That wasn't well received, so we pulled that back because that just seemed to be a argue and bicker and delay the process. So we said, okay, let's just leave it at material departures from professional standards. Then we want to evaluate the performance of peer reviewers, and then we want to feed back information to the reviewers and provide education to the peer reviewers about how to do better. The process as it works, I think that might be our next slide. So the engagements are selected in advance. There's actually 2 components to enhanced oversight. There's a random sample, there's a targeted sample. The random sample is trying to establish a baseline so we can look over time and see if we're getting to be better auditors or not. So the peer reviews are selected, the peer reviewer goes out and does the review, comes back, uploads the documents through Prima. At that point, the AICPA steps in and says, we want to see this city or this Yellow Book or this employee benefit plan. It's been subject to enhanced oversight. So the firm sends their work papers to the AICPA, the peer reviewer sends their checklist to the AICPA. That's all put together and sent to a subject matter expert. They're either current or former peer review board members or members of the expert panels of the 2 audit quality centers. So these people are given experts in these fields. So that subject matter expert goes behind the peer reviewer and re-performs the review of that one engagement. So the first year we rolled this out, there were some criticisms that those folks were taking too much time. Then we came back and said, well, all they're trying to do is determine whether or not the engagement's conforming to professional standards. Shouldn't matter how long they take. But we hear you, and we'll tell them not to spend a week on it. There's criticism that they weren't peer reviewers, and we said that's fine. They're not doing a peer review. They're looking at that set of work papers, that engagement, to see if you followed the standards. So it's on a surprise basis. A peer reviewer doesn't know that they've been chosen until they've sent all their documents in. We put a pretty strict timeline on getting those done because we don't want to delay the firm's review from being accepted. Subject matter expert reviews all that. We'll correspond back and forth with the reviewer if they have questions. They'll draft a report. We had someone in Durham who would sit and make sure the report was worded correctly. It wasn't too harsh or not harsh enough. It wasn't unclear. Then that report's issued, and in some cases we wanted a response from the peer reviewer if the subject matter expert found the peer reviewer missed an engagement that really wasn't done correctly. So as this process unfolds, the report acceptance body will not accept the peer review until that process plays out. Some cases where a peer reviewer said the engagement was fine, the subject matter expert said it was non-conforming, peer reviewer went back and said, yeah, you're right, it is. Then the report acceptance body will decide if that reviewer needs feedback, if they need a performance letter, exactly what kind of feedback you want to give the peer reviewer based on that one engagement. So the report and the response are all in the documents that go to the RAB. Well, that's just what I covered. And so it could delay the acceptance of that. We're very sensitive to not doing that, and we're trying to get those enhanced oversights done as quickly as possible. We have found through that some peer reviewers were big-hearted. We found some gave credit for partial documentation, even though the standards don't allow that. We found some peer reviewers that needed additional training, and so there has been a lot of additional training that's got a lot of information about proper documentation, and I think peer reviewers are much more mindful of that. I don't have the exact statistics, but for a meeting that we have tomorrow, we're looking at people that went through the enhanced oversight process the first time, trying to see how they did 3 years later, and generally peer reviewers are catching things that they missed 3 years ago. And so that's encouraging to us because there's a pretty big gap between what the subject matter experts were saying were non-conforming and what peer reviewers were saying. Well, now we're closing that gap. And so it's encouraging to me while I'm not happy with the results of what the subject matter experts are finding, I'm encouraged that peer reviewers are seeing things a lot more like the subject matter experts. Other questions on oversight? This one's probably a little ugly. This may be the ugliest part of my whole presentation. It touches on Kevin's point earlier. There's a Department of Labor study done on audit quality back in, I don't remember, 2013, 14, 15, somewhere in that time period. So the Department of Labor sent them AICPA 5,500 firm names and said, will you confirm these firms who are doing DOL work are enrolled in peer review? Well, the AICPA went a step further. Not just are they enrolled in peer review, but are they having the right kind of peer review? Did they have a system review, which they would have had to have had with even one employee benefit plan audit? And is there indication if they had a system review that employee benefit plan audit was selected as it should have been? Well, the results came back that 1,100 of those 5,500 firms were not in compliance with the peer review requirements. Some of those could have been misunderstandings where the firm told the peer reviewer, I did last year's engagement, but it's outside my peer review year. I haven't done this year's engagement. The peer reviewer misunderstood the requirements and said, well, then don't worry about it. So a few of those 1,100 could probably be explained that way. Unfortunately, I think the majority of those are where firms chose not to report all their engagements to the administering entity. They chose not to report all their engagements to the peer reviewer. And so here peer review is thinking we're looking at everything, and there's a great deal of work being done that we're simply not seeing. And so how can we as the peer review program be responsible for work that we don't ever get an opportunity to see? There are a number of pretty galling cases of this. It's not the best way to say it maybe, but that's what it is. A firm had 5 audits. They listed 1. They left out 4. The 4 they left out were employee benefit plans. A firm does 1 audit. They don't tell they or the reviewer that they do audits, so they have an engagement review. Or they just don't enroll in peer review and they don't get caught, so to speak. So the AICPA put a big initiative out, identified roughly 20% of those firms, set about a variety of different things. They could remediate, they could have their peer review report recalled and the peer review reperformed. In some cases, people have been referred to ethics, which I think is quite appropriate in this case because that led the peer review program, and that work's not subject to peer review, or wasn't then. So you might imagine that's why the Department of Labor comes out and says 39% of the work we looked at is non-conforming and peer reviews at 15%. Well, yeah, because we didn't get to see all the engagements that were out there. So there's been a second completeness study done on the Department of Labor. The results are much better. Ironically, I think there are a couple of firms that were in both studies that didn't report everything. I also did one on uniform guidance. Those filings are in public databases, and that compliance rate was much higher. It was something like 96. And there could be a variety of reasons. If a firm did that work and then discontinued doing that work, but they resolved those differences as best they could. Firms went out of business. They were acquired. There are a variety of reasons why that came up. But completeness was really a kind of a sore spot with me individually, I guess, because you're hearing stories from regulators and from the Department of Labor and the Comptroller's office about how's peer review not catching all this terrible work that's being done. And now we know why. We didn't even know it was out there. I don't necessarily like that word, but there's a much more robust process to identify those firms. We're now collecting employer ID numbers in Prima as reviews are scheduled because it's much easier to make employer ID numbers in the DOL system than it is trying to match names. Consequences to firms, they sign rep letters now that say I've given you all my engagements and I understand if I haven't that I could be referred to ethics. It's one of the rare places that there's any connection between peer review and ethics, but a firm's put that in their letter. If I haven't told you everything, then I understand I could get referred to the ethics. Hundreds of hours spent in 2014-15 trying to identify these firms, and I think we've done a better job of finding those, but it's very difficult. Last couple items I want to touch on, firm non-cooperation. So if a firm doesn't, there's two different kind of ways to be removed from the peer review program. One is drops. If a firm just doesn't schedule their review or they don't respond to inquiries from the administering entity or they don't pay their fees, then they're just sent off from the program. When that happens, the TSCPA is going to notify the State Board of Accountancy when a firm's dropped. So that you all are aware of that. Yes, sir. Certainly.
Like something you said a while ago about the problem with knowing that firms are doing a certain kind of an audit or doing an audit. It seems like for DOL and Yellow Book audits, those would be fairly easy to ascertain because those entities are DOL sends the peer review board a list of firms that are doing DOL audits, and the same way with Yellow.
I think they can be a lot easier with the employer ID numbers because that we didn't have those before, and so they were just trying to match up names as best they could. I said when the Uniform Guidance Completeness Study happened that I doubted Tennessee would have an issue with that because the Comptroller's Office requires that you have a current peer review report or they won't approve. So the Comptroller's Office in Tennessee makes sure you have a peer review report and make sure it's the right kind of report. I've worked closely when I was chair with the Comptroller's Office to help them understand that so they know what they're getting at. So it should. I think we all just got shocked that there are actually people who wouldn't tell the truth.
Like that the peer review team, when they came to a firm to do a peer review, is this firm doing any of these kind of audits?
I think, again, this all just caught us by such surprise because what if a firm doesn't do any of those type of engagements, but they don't tell you about construction companies they do or United Way agencies or churches. And so the whole program was built on the integrity of the firm. And that's why this completeness thing has just really been a punch in the stomach, so to speak. Are permitted if you have question about a firm's integrity, I guess. But check all that would put you in an interesting position as a peer reviewer because I think if I found out they were not telling me the truth, I would pack my...
Oh.
That's happened. There have been stories over the years about a peer reviewer sitting in a firm's conference room back in the day when you had a library, all these shelves, and you'd see the PPC HUD audit books up there, and then you look at your list and there weren't any HUD engagements. So if you went and asked the partner, they're going to confirm what they told you in that list. So the peer reviewer went and asked a staff person, tell me about these HUD engagements you do, and they said, they're terrible. We've only got 30 days to get them all out, and we do 60 or 80 of them. and none of them are on the list. And so that was back in the days when you actually saw paper, sitting on a shelf. So I think there's some mechanisms like that out there. I would hope that our profession doesn't get us to the point where we have to do that. But that's been a big issue, but I think we've got a good handle on it, at least in the must select areas, the employee benefit plans in the Yellow Book. To leave out one thing about enhanced oversight, my personal goal, you see all this and you see these results in enhanced oversight, but Yellow Book engagements, employee benefit plan audits are fairly complex. So I wonder if we could move past those and get into construction companies and United Way agencies and churches and manufacturers. What would we see there if we had people to look at those after the peer reviewers looked at them? I think that's a resource issue. There's not a public interest in a construction company like there is in a city or a state or somebody gets federal. Perhaps enhanced oversight would be expanded to that. Okay, so we're talking about drops. The firm can get reinstated once they complete whatever it is that they did that caused the drop. If they pay their fees, they can get reinstated via the TSCPA, and then again, CPA will notify the Board of Accountancy when a firm's enrollment, if they're put back in, that they've cured whatever caused them to be dropped. Terminations are a little bit different. They occur after the review's commenced. So a firm can't start a peer review and day one find out they're not going to pass and decide they want to terminate the review at that point. That's not allowed by the standards. It has to go through to completion. So if a firm quits cooperating, then the AICPA has a process they send them notifications that they're not cooperating, and then it goes to a hearing panel for consideration of termination. So here's some examples: failure to provide the peer reviewer with the information, failure to complete corrective actions. This is new, that third bullet, receipt of 2 consecutive non-pass peer review reports. I mentioned earlier it used to be 3. That was the 10-year range that somebody could do. And in 2015, that was shortened down to 2 consecutive non-pass reports. Now, if a firm doesn't pass their peer review, they get a letter after their review's been accepted. They get a letter that kind of warns them, that says you didn't pass your peer review, and if you don't pass the second one, then you're subject to being terminated from the program. It's kind of giving them a warning that they need to lift their guard. That letter's sent just so they're on notice for that. And then failure to improve performance after consecutive corrective actions on the same peer review. So if they've got the same problem and they can't solve it, then that's determined to be non-cooperation. Going back just briefly on that 2 consecutive non-pass reports. So if a firm starts today and 18 months later they have a peer review and they don't pass, and then 3 years after that they have their second peer review and they don't pass, then they can be considered to be sent to the AICPA to be terminated. So you're on 3.5, 4.5, 5 years. But actually it could be quicker than that, because a firm may elect to have an accelerated review. They could do corrective actions. The RAF could say, we want you to have pre-issuance review. The firm does that. It doesn't go very well. And that's considered non-cooperation. So I go back to 20 years ago, maybe when it was 20 years of a firm before you could really get them out of the profession if they're doing poor quality work. It got cut to 10 years, and now I'd like to think it's closer to 4 or 5 years. It's much quicker turnaround. The timing, when I mentioned if a firm doesn't cooperate or a reviewer doesn't cooperate, that timing got cut way down 2 or 3 years ago. We're just trying to keep. So if non-cooperation, if a firm doesn't pass 2 consecutive peer reviews, then that RAB will decide if they want to refer them up to the full TSCPA peer review committee, and that committee will determine whether or not that they've cooperated or not cooperated. And it takes a 2/3 vote for that to be referred to the AICPA peer review board. If it goes to that route, then there's a hearing conducted by the AICPA. I've been a part of probably 15 to 20 of those hearing panels. They're very thorough. Katie and Kara will both attest that there's a great deal of work that goes into that process, because under our membership guidelines, you've got to start due process. It's fair procedures. But you got to make sure you followed all the procedures if you're going to consider terminating a firm's enrollment in peer review. So they've got to send contact logs and certified letters and all this documentation as to what was done. then somebody at the AICPA, the technical staff, reviews all that, making sure all the process has been followed correctly. And if so, then a hearing panel is convened. It's 4 or 5 current or former peer review board members that will review the material, and they meet right now twice a month. They'll meet as often as they have to meet to keep that process moving. Again, I said I've been on about 15 or 20 of these, and this isn't scientific and shouldn't extrapolate this, but I would say somewhere between 85 and 90% of the firms that I saw in a hearing panel were terminated. The only reason they may not be terminated would be if they came and made a pretty compelling case that finally got it, that they, okay, I tried to on my own, I can't do it, I've hired outside help, I'm getting somebody to come in and do pre-issuance reviews, I gave up the audits that I wasn't doing very well. If they tell the hearing panel that, and we're mindful it's educational and remedial, then we're going to let them stay in the program and continue to try to get better at what they can do. But frequently, it's a firm will not sign a representation letter, they won't write a letter of response, or they just have gone dark, so to speak. And those decisions are much easier if they're not going to participate than they're terminated from the program. At that point, then the State Board of Accountancy is notified when a firm's terminated from the peer. In a hearing, I watched one of your hearings sometime last year, very, very similar to the way your all's hearings work. Each side gets their opportunity to make their case. It's not a court of law, but there are procedures that we follow. The firm has every opportunity to make their case and to show that they're trying to make progress. And we give them the benefit of the doubt. But in a lot of cases, the firms just don't try to get better. And so at that point, they're terminated, and then the State Board of Accountancy is notified when that happens. Talked about non-pass reports. This is some new guidance that's out from the AICPA. So if the first report was passed with deficiencies and went to a pass, then that's good. They're making improvement. If it stays at a pass with deficiency, it goes to the committee to be assessed. If they went from a pass with deficiencies down to a fail, then there's a presumption that they're going to be referred for a hearing panel to be terminated from the program. And you see the same thing at the fail. If they fail and they fail a second time, there's just a presumption that you're going to refer them. And if for some reason there are 3 consecutive non-pass reports due to timing of when that was, not a situation where either the administering entities, specifically the TSCPA, the RABs, the committee, anybody's making any extra effort to allow firms to stay in. If they're not trying and they're not making progress, they're not cooperating, then they'll be referred to a hearing panel for termination from allowing firms like that to stay in. Again, I can't say that then once that's done, that 100% of the time those firms are terminated, because sometimes they show they're making progress. If we're going to be educational and remedial, we have to allow them to try to make that progress. On non-pass reports, I think I've covered this. Has the firm improved since the last review? Are all the deficiencies the same? I thought driving down this morning, a firm, let's say 5 years ago, had an engagement review, and they did a review engagement and didn't document their inquiries. And that's their only engagement, they would fail. Then the firm says, well, I'm giving up review engagements. I don't do these very well. So then they pick up compilation engagements, but they miss SARS 21. Or they do preparation engagements and they don't get everything on the statement that's required to be there. Well, again, but they failed for 2 different reasons. And so I think that's things that the committee and the hearing panels all take into account. Or is it a case where they didn't get CPE, you told them to get CPE, they didn't get CPE, and they're still making the same issue? At that point, the decision gets a little bit easier. That it's easier to see the firm's not committed. The firm has been terminated, then they're eligible to re-enroll in peer review under certain circumstances. It goes to the AICPA peer review board if they were terminated due to consecutive non-pass reports or failure to correct deficiencies or significant deficiencies after consecutive reports. For other termination, they can be reinstated via the TSCPA if the reason for that termination has been remediated. And again, the TSCPA notifies the State Board of Accountancy when their enrollment changes. Very quickly, I don't know where I'm close to my hour. Happy to answer any questions from anyone.
and coming off what Larry said too, it seems like that the issue has been that most of the firms haven't been telling you what they've been doing in the past. I know when I was in public accounting, we got our peer review report, but it didn't state what types of reports that we issued or what types of reports were covered in the peer review. Have they changed that? Do you list that somewhere?
It's changed a little bit. If there are must select engagements, they are included. So it will say engagement. We reviewed engagements. I'm sorry. We reviewed audits of employee benefit plans among the engagements we reviewed, or engagements under government auditing standards, including compliance audits under the Single Audit Act. Right now, and fiducia and SOC as well, but those are rare. So those are identified in there. But there's been some discussion. The report was rewritten in 2016, I believe it was. It was the year I wasn't on the board. I think they looked at the possibility of listing that in some great detail, but I think the interest is probably to a little bit shorter report that doesn't have.
I think those details are important, especially when you're the state board and you're trying to determine if they have actually told you that, or the reviewer that they had one of those types of reports. Is that something that we have a tough time looking for in the ALD or any other system that says they have a peer review, but what types of reports they issued, so it could kind of match back to what we're being asked? If somebody calls us and says, hey, can they issue a HUD report or a pension report? Or
So to date, we've not had any trouble, but again, we haven't been looking at reports for very long. So the times that we have, they've matched up because we're looking at governmental engagements or ERISA engagements. So that's easy to detect because those are noted. A lot of the things you see on the legal report are related to these review engagements for the contractors board, and that's never going to show up. But most of those people just simply aren't enrolled, and that's easy to figure out. So,
very informative. Thank you.
Any other questions for Richard?
Richard, this is Art, if I might. One of the things you have to consider on the type of reviews, of course, the report does issue or refer to the must selects, as you all know. The reason why the other stuff is not in there is, again, this is a peer review on the quality control system of a firm, not a peer review of specific types of engagements, if that makes sense.
It does. Thanks, Art.
Actually, the same peer review program is used for one firm as used for the 4 national firms, and so it'd probably get cumbersome at their level to try. Whatever type practice that firm has.
It seemed like when I was in public, when you listed the types of audits you did, you had different makeups of how you were going to test that system of internal control.
That's correct. Risk-based. You assess the risk. And I'm glad you raised that question. I think our peer reviewer maybe looked at 10 to 12% of our engagements. 90% that they didn't look at. We just can't look at everything. So you have a risk-based model. And that's probably one of the tougher parts of peer review, is knowing which engagements you want to look at.
Any other questions?
Richard, one other thing that you might consider doing is, as chairman of the oversight committee, did you ever have any enhanced oversights?
Yeah, thanks, Art. Really appreciate you bringing that up. The first year when there was
familiarity.
For familiarity threat, the first year of the pilot program I was selected, I was chair of the oversight task force. The second year I was selected, group that administers the enhanced oversight program. Nor should there be. I don't want favoritism. I would have asked to have been picked, I guess. Familiarity. So they're random selections, and as we all know from our audit days, the random, that's how you have a statistically valid sample. And so they pick who they pick, and that's
question, and I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, it may be forthcoming, but with regards to the benchmarks and whether an administering entity is meeting those benchmarks, Will the board at some point ever be privy to a report on that, or only through a proc?
I would. We're not meeting benchmarks. I would think that would be the way it would get reported. This is.
Nothing in the benchmarks. We would not provide the detailed reports that we have to run to determine compliance with the benchmarks, but I would have no problem. I don't think TSCPA would have a problem providing to the board our compliance with the benchmarks. So, I mean, there's several,
Right.
but it's just a basic form. We mark yes, no notes as to why we may not have complied with one, but we would have no issue providing that if it was wanted.
Do you mind if I ask one quick question? It might be more directed towards TSCPA than you, but what if you have an individual who their firm has been terminated from peer review, and then they just open up another firm and enroll in peer review? Are there any control steps there to handle that situation?
I'm going to try to answer this. I think the AICPA would be I think that's been tried in the past. There's actually a form if a firm merges with another firm. There's forms that both firms fill out, and that determines who the successor firm is. And so it's generally whoever has more than 50% running and auditing hours. So I think at that point, when they enrolled their new firm, they would have to some way tell their history, and that would some way be tied together. It's not going to be a do-over for sure. And then I think regardless, as a peer reviewer, if I'm going to peer review that new firm, I'm going to go back and look at what happened to that old firm. So they're not going to get to wipe the slate clean by playing games like that. Now, if you have different owners, it could happen. But I think, again, the reviewer will assess risk a lot higher for that.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Richard, thank you for being here. It's a very thorough presentation on a subject that is near and dear to our hearts. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's been a good program. It's helped a lot of firms get better. Some firms have found out. I think most importantly, it's helped good firms get even better. So I think it's been a good program. Still got ways to go, but we keep trying to get better. So I think that's helpful. If you have questions that you think of later, you can pass them to Wendy. She can pass them on to me. I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art, for joining us.
Thank you.
Art. Thank you, Art. What I'd like to do maybe is cover this next agenda item, and then we'll take a short break after that. And the next agenda item is on the NASBA Board of Directors update and committee reports. And I know Wendy's director's report covered the NASBA annual meeting, and I thought it was a very good summary of that. The only thing that I would add, I was still a member of the NASBA Board of Directors until that meeting, and Andy was elected as a board member during the meeting. So I'll ask you in a minute. I know you just had a January board meeting, and you may want to make some comments about that. But the only thing I would add to Wendy's report from my term was that during the annual meeting, we did have the usual breakout sessions. Those are done by region, and we meet with Kentucky and Georgia, Alabama, Florida, a couple other jurisdictions. And I know, Trey, you have had a lot of concern about the 150-hour requirement and whether we should go back to the 120 or not. That subject was discussed at length in our breakout session. Richard Carroll, who is the executive director of the Kentucky State Board, is actually the NASBA board member representing the executive directors this year. Dick and the state of Kentucky are very outspoken that they believe we should go back to the 120 hours. I think they had even had a board retreat where that was an agenda item, and the whole board weighed in and said, we really need to change this. Nothing was decided in those meetings. There's a lot of comments and notes taken, and the information is given back to the full board to then discuss and act on it. And my take on that is where this has gotten to is there's a fair amount of sentiment out there that we really haven't accomplished a lot with 150 hours. And I think that discussion will be rolled into this new committee that a group that was appointed to study the issue of technology and whether that needs to be part of that whole discussion. And so the matter's been brought up. I think it's brought up in a very serious, significant way, and so I think it will be given full consideration as the debate and discussion goes forward. Wendy, do you have anything to add to that?
The new chair, Janice Gray, has appointed a task force. In fact, Dan Dustin called me on Friday to get a sense of this board's thoughts, as well as, and we talked a little bit about it, but I also directed him to our last meeting where we had the conversation. So they're going to be meeting here soon to talk about it.
Yeah, we did. We just, and as she said, Janice has kind of appointed the task force, and they thought it was so important that Laura Trish is going to be the chair of that committee, which everybody here may or may not know. She's the new NASBA incoming chair. She's vice chair right now. And they're going to discuss, the 120, 150 courses, the experience. There was a lot of talk at the board meeting and concern, and it was voiced back and forth. They've already set a date to meet. And so I think we're going to hear a lot of things coming. So there was really a lot of questions back and forth as to what they were going to look at, what they weren't going to look at, and a lot of input as to 120 and 150. And so I think that they've got a real charge, and we should get some good input back.
Is there anything else in the January board meeting that you'd want to make everybody aware of? Or?
Yeah, I made a couple of notes here. It was a board meeting and also the regional directors meeting that we had breakout. And NASBA went and met with the PCAOB in November, which is very impressive how they keep in touch and want to make sure that things are going through for the profession, and they represent us there. And then the PCAOB had an International Institute on Audit Regulations, and it's kind of a private event where it's by invitation only. Our own Colleen Conrad was present at that meeting. I didn't know what it was, and I had not heard of it before, so I went out and looked it up on the web, and it said here it's an opportunity to exchange ideas with representatives from many of its counterparts. He says presenters include financial market regulators, foreign audit regulators, investors, audit committee members, academics, and experts in economics and public policy, and they just address a variety of auditing concerns as it relates to audit regulation and audit quality. And so that was attended. We've already gotten an update on what Wendy done, the continuous testing, and they're throwing out January the 1st, 2020 as a possibility for it. As far as NASBA is going to meet with AICPA, and they call it their summit meeting. They meet twice a year with AICPA, and that's going to happen in February. And one of the things that will be discussed there will be the CPA evolution that Wendy was talking about. They've actually kind of developed something right now in a report, and they're going to get together and talk about it. And so there's a lot more to come in that area. So expect that. It said one of the things that was kind of discussed mainly in the regional directors meeting, but also a little bit at the board meeting, was there's still concern by state boards of accountancy about the confusing and misleading titles. And so they're going to get together and talk about that, and they're going to discuss, what they need to do and what the state boards need to do to wake up and realize that there's some confusing titles out there. And they're going to bring that up in the summit meeting too. When you look at the peer review matters, I don't know, we didn't talk about Chapter 3, but there seems to be some issues with Chapter 3, specifically in New York, on the confidentiality of peer review information and the regulations associated with it. And they actually issued a draft report for changes on the same day we met, which was January the 18th. And it says here's NASBA is acting to get some of the languages changed because there's a lot of concern over some of the verbiage in that draft. So they're going to meet to discuss that. Nano learning was a topic. We don't have an issue here. But also there was a concern about a new exposure draft by the AICPA. I don't know if anybody, it's a AICP code of professional conduct, staff augmentation arrangements interpretation. Has anybody seen that?
Is that a peak exposure draft?
It's a yes.
Okay.
And it was issued on December 7th, 2018. Comments are requested by March the 7th, and it may have some effect here to our board. It says that the comment is that some members of member firms also provide human resource capital as a service to clients under staff augmentation arrangements, also referred to as loan staff. And it talks about when it's acceptable, how they have to be managed, that it's a non-attest service, and there's some concern about the public and the perception from the public if that staff member is also over there working with that client, and also then the firms actually issue an opinion. It seems like a lot of the bigger firms, what we were kind of talking about, didn't really see this as something they were going to do, but there was a lot of concern from an ethical standpoint.
From an independent standard?
Some independence. So it's the peer review members matters, and it's the AICP issued an exposure draft for proposed interpretation of AICP code on professional conduct. So then they talked about the international relevance with Stephen Hadrill. He is going to leave the FRC. There were some issues in South Africa with audits, and that body was in 2016 kind of put up to be the governing body for enforcement with audits, and it says that also other auditors, accountants, and actuaries is what they kind of govern. And so he had some issues, and he's stepping away. And then they also talked about agreements for which they had reached with Australia, New Zealand, Bermuda, and also Hong Kong. And then there was a lot of discussion about what was going on with the Charter of Accountants of England and Wales, and the concerns about the BREDX negotiations. So some of that was discussed. The CPA exam, they said the CPA exam testing volumes were down. They had projected that they would be down this fiscal year, but they also thought that they would come back up pretty quick, but they have not yet. And that NASBA is kind of monitoring that closely. They're looking at, they're analyzing the data, and they don't expect them to jump back as fast as they had thought. So there was some discussion in that matter. And I don't know, did everybody get a newsletter showing that the NASBA had changed their IT, where they're now outsourcing their IT? It doesn't seem like much, but they entered a long-term agreement with CGI, and it really allows them to focus on their core mission. At the same time, it allows them to advance and increase their effectiveness with their IT systems, and we actually got to see some of that in practice, because it seems like some of the software systems, as far as the CPE and the audit service platform that they've come up with, it's kind of enabled them to do things faster. So we may see more software come out of NASBA. It was kind of my understanding. And so there have been some IT concerns, and we talked about security and at the board meeting, and make sure that the due diligence was done. We had a large conversation about due diligence with the new company, and they had really done a lot of work and had a lot to tell us and show us. As Wendy said, there's 8 states that are fixing to come active on the new CPE platform, and it is slick. We got a presentation of it. I think we're really going to enjoy it, especially from an audit standpoint, with some of the things that we'll do. It's Florida, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee, Virginia, and Missouri, or Montana. And so all those executive directors are getting together in March, and they're going to have, a hands-on with the program. And it has a dashboard to track audit progress for compliance. It has an audit generation tool where you can pick it by 8 or 9 different ways to pick audits, including one that says never been audited before. It has a robust report where Wendy can get results to see how we're doing and how many fails and pass. And you can actually go through and actually fail a certain course, and it keeps track of the total numbers and gives you a summary real quick. And it also allows the person that you're auditing to upload and attach documents to it. So it really was impressive. And with that, there's a new line of business that's going to be launched that allows firms to come in and get the data. Because, if you've got a large firm, as we know Kevin is a part of, if you can actually see who's licensed and what their progress is and whether they're getting the required number of hours for the specific state. So HR department's really going to have some ability to keep track of their CPAs and practice. And what the NASBA has done is they've used some advanced language which allows them not only to upload from the firms the summary from their own in-house products, but also to download the next day after comparing them and then flip it back to the firm so they can upload it in their system. So people will be able to instantly make sure that their staff is making progress on their CPE, which I know in public accounting, we didn't have near as many CPAs, but it was a nightmare for, our administrative person to keep track of all of our CPE. The future is ALD and CPA verify rebuild is just to occur, which is very exciting, and you've seen it too, which may allow inputs from peer review, DOL, PCLB, and IRS, which could make that product a whole lot smarter, a whole lot usable, and really put some teeth into it. And that was exciting to see as they went through it. 2 things that they have, which we're in Nashville, so it's kind of cool to see this, was that the Government Relations Committee of State Societies is coming to Nashville. They've been here a couple of years before. They call themselves as GR Food Group. And they're going to meet in Nashville this summer. And they've been here in the past several years, which is kind of neat. But also the International Ethics Standards Board is coming to Nashville. And they're going to be here in June of 2019, which I thought was, wow, NASBA's really making a difference in bringing different groups here. At our regional directors meeting, I already mentioned the 120 and 150 and a lot of discussion in that area. There was some discussion about cyber concerns and what boards are doing in their states. And so I expect in the future we'll probably get some questions on that, where we have questions come out to the boards. We went over the comments from the annual meeting, and we also discussed the fact that we needed to get the agendas out quicker. So we're going to have a call meeting in a couple of weeks to finalize the agenda so that we can get the agenda up and in the platform so that Wendy can pull it down, so that at that point maybe boards will be able to get it approved quicker and maybe save some money on flights, to go to attend the meetings. And so that was kind of discussed. And then we went over where the meetings were going to be held. One of the most surprising things was I didn't know Judy was at the resort with us, and I think you've been in a finance committee meeting, hadn't you? And so we showed up, and there's Judy, and says, "Andy, what's going on?" I'm like, "What are you doing here?" So got to see Judy. Didn't get to speak to her much, and I thought I'd get to see her the next day, and she was gone.
We met 2 days, a day prior to y'all, and a lot of, all the board, except for the regionals, were in the finance. And should I go ahead and give my?
Yeah, that was it for me. Yeah.
Okay, because a lot of what Andy covered was also in our meeting. They recognized all the new members.
Can you say again what committee?
Sorry, Finance and Administration.
For NASBA.
For NASBA, yes. And
Still on the ethics committee.
no, I went off that committee and onto this. They switched me over. Yeah. And this one's a lot more fun. I'll say that. I'll tell you, the ethics committee that was a lot of work. It was tough, but it was good. I mean, I learned a lot through the process, and I enjoyed it. But basically, in our committee meeting, Michael Bryant and Troy, I can't remember Troy's last name, but the CFO and controller at NASBA presented the financial statements and compared the budget, and they did a very intense variance analysis and unbelievable. They said, I complimented them greatly on it. They said, Michael said, we're presenting to the experts, so we have to be, above, the average type presentation. So it was very good. They basically explained that the really significant budget variance, which was the IT change, and just I won't go into all of that, but basically it was a very confidential situation, and they couldn't really even put it in the budget because of the nature of how it was going to affect full-time employees, how it was going to affect their family environment there, because they are very pro teamwork family, and it's been a real process for them, and it's been difficult, I think, on their whole staff. The good thing is some of the full-time employees were able to be acquired by the incoming IT outsourced group, and everyone, I think, was offered that opportunity. Now, it wasn't necessarily in Nashville, but so everyone got the opportunity to have another position. I think they tried to make sure that they could do everything they could, but it really has vastly increased the bandwidth for NASBA in the IT area, and everyone in our committee meeting was in full agreement with how it was handled, with the variances and explaining it, and really excited about what it's going to do for the future and how it's going to help the state boards with decisions that they did make. So that was primarily, in addition to what Andy covered, what we went through, and it was a very effective meeting, very good. And we typically meet, just so you know, you'll see me again. We typically meet the 2 days, and then you guys come in. We overlap a day, I think is the way it is, when they have the board meetings quarterly. So I'm real honored to be on that committee, by the way. It's a really good one.
I am on a new committee. It's the CPA Examination Review Board, and that board reviews the exam and the operating procedures and policies that AICPA, NASBA, and Prometrics are involved with to make sure that the CPA exam is secure. Rely on it. So it's kind of like an internal audit function, and there is NASBA staff. There's a director and then an IT guy and a couple of consultants that help with the board and the work that they do. We had a meeting, when was it, November, maybe, I think, where all the board's members got together to review the plans for the overall review. So there's teams for NASBA, AICPA, and Prometrics. So all of those teams got together. I'm the team lead for NASBA, which is great because it's local for me. And then all of the board members will get together 2 or 3 times a year to review the field. Like I said, approve the plans, review the results of the field work, and approve the overall report that will be presented at the Eastern Regional meeting. That one. So it's it's a good group, and we are looking at the contract that you mentioned related to the outsourcing of the IT functions at NASBA as part of the review for the NASBA piece of the review. That was a big thing that we're looking at. So.
Pam. Like to give an update on the group that you're involved with?
Yes. I'm on the CBT, which is computer-based testing. Very much overlaps with yours, I believe, Janet. But we had a conference call meeting, and Ed Barnicott of NASBA administered it. But these are procedural things, but they're very important. The first thing we talked about was the continuous testing, and we'll cover that later in the meeting, I believe. But they talked about that it would take states about 3 to 18 months to implement it. They want to move forward in January 2020. Most states said about an average of 9 months to a year to implement it. The second thing was international expansion, as has already been mentioned. Specifically, we talked about India, and something I didn't know was that with India and also with China and some other countries, they move pretty slowly because they want to have the approval of the professional accounting group there. They push this or advertise this as a supplemental credential in that particular country, as in, we're not here to compete with you, we're here to give you a supplemental credential. But I asked then if that meant we didn't expect that these people would become certified in the U.S., but they said, yes, we do. Really encourage that and expect that most will become certified here as well. They're looking at going into Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and maybe Pakistan. And they emphasize that they don't have to have the approval of the professional group there, but it's a professional courtesy, I guess you'd say, and we'd much rather have it. One thing that brought some energetic discussion was something I was not aware of, and it seems small, but it has brought big problems. When somebody sits down to take the CPA exam, there's an introductory screen, and it's administrative things. It stays up there 5 minutes, and then you must, within the 5 minutes, you must log in to start the test. If you do not, it's not just that they will push you to go ahead and take the test. The computer shuts down. You are removed from the test site. You have to take it at another time. You forfeit your money and your opportunity to test. All of us thought that was extreme, and it seemed like, I don't know, some of you may know more about this than I did. I went online and looked up forums where people talk about these things, and people were panicking. People were furious because they'd been kicked out. Some said that there had not been a clock, and of course you can't have a watch. My students tell me there is a clock. It moved, I think, last year to 5 minutes instead of 10. I asked if they already have this information. They said yes, it's in the testing materials. And so I said, why can't the system just click off of that and say, here you go, log in? And others also thought that there should be some alternative. And some suggested just build the 5 minutes into the test period, and if they want to sit there and look at the administrative things a long time, that's their privilege. But we thought it was just extreme to make them forfeit. And I made the point that, as we've learned, NASBA is doing, and ASCPA, are doing surveys about why don't people finish, why don't people stick with it. And it was obvious on these forums I looked at that this was considered a gotcha. This was considered just a real negative, and I personally think bad PR. So 100% of the committee members thought that we should come with another alternative. What had been presented to us was Prometrics was planning to, well, here's what happens. People use that 5 minutes to start brain dumping, to write down the list they've memorized with their memorization tool. That's not cheating, but they lose track of time. So Prometrics wanted the right to kick them out, make them forfeit if they saw anyone doing what they called brain dumping during the 5 minutes. And we said, but it's not cheating. That's just too extreme, and also a big burden on Prometrics. So they have already initiated that people can have one, they call it a timeout, different meaning there, and still stay, but we just thought a different approach was in order. And let's see what else. People thought that there should perhaps be a CBT administration committee presentation at either the executive conference or the regional conference to highlight things that the committee's talking about. Also, in the future, we're going to talk about complaints people have had about the whiteboards. People say they don't give me, you don't have paper anymore. You have a whiteboard. And people say they don't give us an eraser. I've had to erase it with my shirt. My students have said it's a small little workspace. I like workspace myself. Anyway, people are saying maybe we should go back to paper. And then finally, the biggest source of problem reports from test centers is having cell phones out during breaks. So people have to put them in a locker, but people are on break. They can get it out and talk to people at some centers, and that seems inappropriate. But also, people thought maybe they shouldn't be banned from the test centers because, for example, if people are traveling, that would be difficult. So, small things, but they could be big problems. Like that.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Larry, are you still on the audit committee at NASBA?
Oh, yes.
We normally save the best until last, but we obviously didn't do that this time. So,
Well, I was just going to say, as we all know, the audit committee is the most prestigious committee. One of the reasons that Judy finds the finance committee so interesting is that the audit committee has been through the audit with those financial statements, and everything is so clean it just makes. But we just recently had our introductory meeting. We have 3, possibly 4 meetings a year. January is where everybody just gets to know each other, introduce, talk about how the audit committee works, and it's normally done by phone. Then we meet again in May to plan the audit, and we actually meet with the audit firm, and which happens to be LBMC. LBMC has been NASBA's auditors for the past 20 years. And the audit, what they're planning, their scopes and those kinds of things. And then meet again in October and September, depending on the timing of the completion, and actually send these financials out to us over a 2-week period. Really it's a lot of detail work. So we're in that second of the 3 meetings, or we're actually the first, and going to have another meeting in May. So not a lot happened so far other than planning.
it's great to see so many of our board members involved on committees and whatever. Is there anybody that we've missed that's on the committee?
I'm serving on the Compliance Assurance Committee, and
Okay.
we've just had one meeting, and Andy already kind of highlighted a little bit about, we talked quickly in a conference call about the changes to that the AICPA peer review board is making to the Chapter 3 of the Oversight Handbook, and they gathered us together to get our feedback that they could submit for suggestions for changes. So peer review board meets this Wednesday. They will make a presentation and vote on changes to that section. So that's what we've done.
Hey, I think we're moving along reasonably well so that we might finish at a reasonable hour and get everybody out of town and on the way home. I know Andy's got a winter storm warning up his way, and you probably do. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back, and I think we can get through our agenda pretty quickly after that. If everybody's okay with this, is we're going to let the chairman of each committee lead the discussion, present the information, and then make a recommendation to the whole board, and we will vote on it as a full board rather than as a committee and then re-vote as a board. So the first committee is the licensing committee, and Larry, I believe you're the chair of that committee. Would you like to lead this discussion, please?
Once again, the licensing committee has a very detailed a request that has a lot of details in it this time from Ms. Carson. This applicant has provided a lot of information, and let me remind you before I start that there is a rule that we can choosing that says the board may in particular cases extend the term of conditional credit, notwithstanding the requirements of these rules, upon a showing that the credit was lost by reason of circumstances beyond the candidate's control. So just keep that in mind as we discuss this request. But this young lady actually, due to circumstances that she details in this request, lost 3 sections of the exam. She lost BEC, FAR, and audit. And we're actually in a period that's a little unusual in that we've already passed the time that anything her control could be done. So she's at a point, and I had a little bit of trouble with the timing here, but just to cut to the chase, she had various issues that got involved in her situation. She had twin babies, had pregnancy issues during that period of time. One of the babies had autism. Her husband was deployed to Kuwait, and she had postpartum depression after having her children. So in December of 18, she took BEC again and didn't pass it, and became aware through a friend of a friend that there were situations where in extenuating circumstances would or could grant extensions of conditional credit. So if you flip over to your chart that shows the scores on the exam, and Wendy, I may have to get your help here because I got a little bit confused on this chart. On the 3 lost credits, is the date over on the far left the date that the exam was taken and passed? That's not the date she lost them, right?
Correct.
I couldn't tell from the letter when she actually lost the credit on those 3.
Well, they all would be, since you took them on different days, they would be different expiration dates, but they all have been lost at this point.
So that's what I was saying a while ago. The complicating factor here is normally we get extensions or requests for extension before the time period has lapsed. In this case, time period has already lapsed, and she's asking us to go back and already lapsed. And I'm not saying we can't do that, but that's what's on the table for discussion. Opening this up to the whole board. If anyone wants to ask a question or comment on that, we can start this discussion.
Is she located in Tennessee? Because I know she mentions South Carolina and such. I don't know if she's
Well, her scores were mailed to Lexington, Kentucky. So I got the impression, right, wrong, I'm not sure, but I got the impression that she's a Tennessee candidate taking the exam in Tennessee.
Keep in mind,
Portions of the time.
keep in mind, her husband is in the military, so she may just, since she started the process, she may have been moved around.
She may have been in Tennessee during parts of this period of time.
In reading her letter and everything, and I mean all the conditions you just mentioned, I mean you sit there and you're very sympathetic to that, and I think in a normal situation we would extend the period of time for one, maybe even two sessions of exam, but this is one where to me there's just too much time between the last credit she lost and where we are today, and I just don't see where we could reasonably grant her an extension at this point, and maybe we need to tell her to, that we understand and normally sympathize with the things she's outlined, but there's just too much time expired, and that's the way I personally feel on the thing. I guess I'm asking, I hope we don't debate this too long, because I think it's clearly, to me, clearly.
Have we ever granted extensions before where the time had already lapsed?
Yes, but not to this degree.
We're talking about even in the latest date, we're talking that the lapse has already been at least a year to a year and a half, right?
Yeah, the way I calculated it was the last one that she lost credit for expired September 30th of 17. So
my fear would be, and I'm like Casey, I'm very sympathetic to all these issues. I guess my fear is that if we grant this one, that we get people coming out of the woodwork and say, "Gosh, I didn't know you could do that." So I want to send my request in too. And that's not the way we should judge it, maybe, but we do have to worry about precedents that we set. So I'm very sympathetic. I've read this thing 2 or 3 times. Every time I read it, I get happened to one person in this period of time, but other thoughts?
When we granted an extension before, Wendy, do you know how long of a timeline?
I don't, without going back and looking at them.
Last one I remembered is it was before it expired. It was right at the time we granted it, like one window or 2 windows, but
Like 1 or 2 windows, I think is
sympathetic to it. But I think the time of delay in the request is too excessive. I just think we open up Pandora's box to a whole lot of other people that have probably had, somewhat similar situations as far as exploration of tests.
I wanted to add a couple of things. One is, I think extenuating circumstances absolutely are there. Secondly, however, I don't think we should just dwell on setting a precedent, because if this were a serious enough exception, we would be setting a precedent for extreme circumstances. But I think we've even gotten into a situation where she wasn't tested over current standards. I mean, these tests are so old that things have really changed since then. So I don't think her passing that test really is equivalent to passing it within 18 months of when she gets her license. So I am saying I agree, but I think those points are important.
Want to make a motion, Larry, or you want to
make a motion that we not grant this exception?
Okay, got a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, got a motion, a second. Are there any further questions or discussions? Okay, hearing none, I guess we need a roll call vote. Wendy?
Of everybody, correct? We're going through. Okay. Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge,
Aye.
Casey Stewart,
Aye.
Gay Moon,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe, Trey Watkins,
Aye.
Judy Weatherby,
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
Motion carries.
I would suggest that in our response back to her that we explain that I mean, I don't know what you normally say on these kinds of things, but that we explain that it was, the timing was just too long. Okay with that?
Yes, yes.
Can I ask a question? Does it say somewhere with public information that people can, in extenuating circumstances, request extensions?
We don't have anything out there that advertises that.
I guess it concerns me that she happened to find out about it from friends. You don't want it to be a hidden thing that only an inner group know about. On the other hand, you don't want to encourage people to ask for just anything. But maybe there should be some statements.
Isn't it in our rules that we just?
Yeah, I just read it a while ago.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 0020-01-.06 called examinations of the code. It says that the board may, in particular cases, extend the term of conditional credit notwithstanding the requirements of these rules upon a showing that the credit was lost by reason of circumstances beyond the candidate's control.
Okay. Okay.
Now, I don't know how knowledgeable people are of those rules, but that's the rule.
But it's there. Okay. I do now remember you read that. I apologize.
That's all right. I thought maybe you took a break.
I could, but I didn't.
Okay, Larry, you want to cover the exam review board survey?
I got one of these myself personally. I guess the rest of y'all did too through my email, and I've already responded to this. But I guess we would. Wendy, you want to cover this?
Yeah, I had refrained from answering because a lot of times these come to me and I'm supposed to respond on behalf of the board. So after I kind of put all this together, I realized that you all had received it as well. So yes, I would just encourage you to respond. If you've already responded and you thought of something, let me know. I can include it in my response because I haven't responded yet. So I know that in the past the exam seems to have been going very smoothly, and I think it still is. But there are things that are arising related to continuous testing and those types of things. The security issue Pam brought up, and so if there's anything you would like to relay, we can talk about that now. But
this is a survey from the board that I'm on, so it's just getting your input. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can just respond individually, and I've done that too.
Okay.
I've already responded to the survey, and I assume others of you have also. So, no action needed on that. It's just okay. The next committee is the Enforcement Committee, and again, Gabe Roberts could not be here today, and Kevin Monroe has graciously agreed to chair this discussion, and it's a tough task, so thank you, Kevin. We'll let you lead the discussion.
Welcome, Mr. Chairman, and big shoes to fill with respect to Gabe. The first item from the Enforcement Committee is just the notation that we have a summary of complaints for the last quarter that was in our read-ahead packet. As of January 1, we had 71 complaints that were in process, and that's dropped down to 68 as of January 23rd, but you can kind of see the activity of closings and transactions with respect to those cases. The next item I'd like to go to is the actual legal report, and for that, before we get into the cases, I'll just kind of summarize some categories and then turn it over to Wendy and Sarah to talk about some recommendations that we'll be seeing in some of these cases that may be a little bit different than we've seen elsewhere or previously. So when you kind of synopsize the cases, not really different from prior quarters. Performing a test work without enrolling it in peer review, failure to obtain a firm permit, and CPE audits or CPE types of activities seem to be the most prevalent types of disciplinary cases that we have again. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy and or Sarah to kind of talk about, particularly from a peer review standpoint, some changes in the recommendations that we'll be seeing in certain of these cases as we move forward.
One thing I'll add, and then I'll turn it over to Sarah, is that on your iPads, there's a remnant from the cosmetology meeting. So it looks like there may be 2 legal reports loaded on there. So just make sure you're looking at the accountancy legal report and not the cosmetology. So, okay, I'm going to turn over to Sarah.
Sure. Thank you, members of the board today. So Kevin is right. When we get down to 11 and 12 and 13, you'll notice that those are going to be typical fact patterns that we see, folks engaging in a review and not being enrolled in peer review. But you'll notice it does have a smaller penalty, but a more strict peer review requirement. This is something Wendy and I have talked about for some time as it relates to the peer review penalty schedule, with the thought being we hear very frequently back from our respondents, even the ones that are most understanding of our process, that are usually reimbursing the money, that can show us they've only done one engagement, that the $3,000 penalty is not it's gone beyond, for those folks, beyond putting them into compliance and gone to an area where it's more detrimental than anything. And we're finding that some folks, in order to pay our penalty, can't ultimately enroll in peer review because the financial hit is so hard for them. And ultimately, they never do enroll in peer review, and they just drop engagements altogether, which, obviously we'd rather them do that than do them without being enrolled in peer review. But as a possible solution, looking at what the cost of peer review for these engagements versus a process audit for some of our bigger auditors, we thought maybe a tiered system might be better. So if someone is doing reviews, like we see quite often for the Motor Vehicle Commission and the licensed contractors, that would be a $750 penalty, with obviously room to move around if we see mitigating or aggravating factors. And then step it up with compilations, and then even more so with audits. And in order to make sure that doesn't take the teeth out of it, instead of what we've typically done, which is allow our respondents to opt out of peer review, pay the penalty, and never engage in peer review, they would then be required to enroll in peer review. So we know that they're having to pay the cost of whatever that might be for that particular engagement. And they would need to produce to us a completion letter. So we know not only did they enroll, they've gone through the entire process, and that particular engagement that we're aware of has been looked at and that's been signed off on by the peer reviewers. We thought that this would kind of strike a balance between ensuring that it's not just the cost of doing business when we assess a civil penalty, but take into consideration a lot of these times there are solo CPA practitioners that with a majority tax practice that have picked up a couple reviews for tax clients. So trying to find something we think would still bring them into compliance, make them very aware, and very cautious of what they're doing, but not to the point where it is so detrimental that we're ultimately seeing non-compliance with our orders and with peer review just because of the burden it puts on. However, this is just a concept. It's just an idea. Wendy and I are definitely not saying we think you need to change if you do not like to. This is just one recommendation, kind of taking in the light some feedback we've gotten over the years. So keep that in mind going forward. Again, always happy to adjust our recommendations to fit this board, and that's all they are, recommendations. So no emotional attachment from me. So with that, that's kind of the biggest picture. I do have one small issue I'll bring up at the end. It's a very small modification to a consent order I made that needs the board's approval. But otherwise, we can kind of move through this probably pretty quickly with our consent agenda if you'd like, Kevin.
Any questions on the overview that Sarah provided for us in terms of kind of ideologically where the staff is headed on some of these recommendations? We'll go ahead and get going through our agenda here. What I would recommend that we do is we kind of take this in 3 batches. The first is the consent agenda, which is items 1 through 4. The second item is the presentation items 5 through 15. And the last batch would be the representation items numbers 16 through 26, if everybody's kind of okay. With respect to the consent agenda items, I think those are pretty straightforward, and typically we don't call those cases out in too much detail in our discussions. But would be happy to kind of surface any questions or concerns that board members have with respect to those. And I guess to be parliamentary procedure wise here, I would move the motion that we accept the recommendations for these items in the consent agenda, numbers 1 through 4.
The motion is second. Is there
May I have a question?
any further discussion? Or
Yes, please. On number 4, I just want to make sure that we're being, this respondent, my understanding is that they misrepresented that they had taken the CPE on their application. Is that true?
No, they did take the CPE. It just turns out they had a misunderstanding of 36 hours on whether those would count. They believed that they would count towards the requirement. They did not.
Okay. Because I thought this doesn't seem okay. Got it. Thank you for clarifying.
okay, any further questions or comments? Wendy, I guess we need a roll call vote on that motion.
Casey Stewart.
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Trey Watkins.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay. Kevin, go ahead.
We'll now go ahead and proceed to work through the proposed discipline batch of cases, which are in our read-ahead packets numbers 5, I believe, through 15. And these basically include what Sarah was talking about when we get to cases 10, 11, and 12 in terms of kind of a revised recommendation with respect to assessment or penalty for peer review issues. These typically run the gamut primarily from CPE audits, unlicensed activity, peer review. Our friends over at the Contractors Board are continuing to give us good amounts of business, unfortunately. And I think we've already discussed the nuances around 10, 11, and 12 that I wanted to pull out for our specific considerations. I don't have any other specific items that I wanted to bring out to the full board for its consideration that I thought were out of the ordinary. And so I guess what I would do is offer a motion to approve the recommendations for each of these cases in batch number 5 through 15 as specified in the read ahead.
I'll second.
Motion and second. Now, any
You're pulling out
discussion?
11. What'd you say? You're pulling out?
I'm sorry, did I
Yeah.
go one too far? Yes.
15 is recommendation is discussion.
Okay, yep. Yeah, we'll have to take that separately. Okay, so it'd be 5 through 14, excuse me.
Motions to approve the recommendation on cases 5 through 14. Do you have a second on that motion? Yeah. All right, any?
Could I ask a question? Why is number 6 $1,000 for not enrolling in peer review, and number 11 is $750?
Yes, this the 750 we mitigated. We talked about
Because they
this
were already enrolled.
because they were already enrolled.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. That's what I was thinking. I just wanted to make sure we're being consistent.
You're dead. Wendy asked the same question, so I appreciate that.
Oh, good.
Okay, any further questions or discussions? We need another roll call vote, please.
Casey Stewart.
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Trey Watkins.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, Kevin?
Let's go ahead and proceed with case number 15, and this is one where staff has presented to the board a couple of questions. The case involves an entity or a person or respondent that was terminated from the AICPA peer review program for failure to comply. And so essentially they received a rating of fail on their peer review. They did not provide a corrective action plan satisfactory to the peer review committee to address the deficiencies. And then after being notified that the firm failed its peer review, they decided that it would not try and correct and instead drop out, and indicated that it was cutting back on its practice. And so in the course of consideration for this case, as we see, legal has recommended that this board hold a discussion on how it wishes to proceed on these types of matters where a respondent is terminated from peer review for consecutive less than pass reports. And the two questions particularly framed are, in what scenarios does the board wish to pursue disciplinary action based solely on the information contained in consecutive pass with deficiency or failed peer reviews? And secondly, would the board like for the board's investigator to gather additional information outside of the documents contained in the peer review files? For example, should the investigator independently review the attest work at that firm that may or may not have been subject to peer review? Let's go ahead and engage in a discussion on this. And so it's apropos that Richard was kind enough to give us a briefing on the AICPA peer review program. But in this particular case, we have a respondent that failed, that did not remediate its deficiencies, and now wants to just drop out of the program. And so, I guess the options here, are kind of across the board. I don't know, Wendy or Sarah, if you kind of considered any kind of frame of reference for those options or not.
Sure. So we wanted to bring this one and pull it out because this is going to be something we think this board is going to see as often, likely, as some of our other major issues. Now that we're able to access those peer review documents, it begs the questions in some of these cases when we get a complaint, are we looking into these peer reviews with the intent of bringing a due professional care violation before the board? And if so, in what cases? It will take a lot of resource to do that, and we also have questions about whether that's the intent of peer review. But obviously with the new statute and new rules, this board has every right to review those documents. I think we've had discussion in the past about when we've had other violations and looking at the peer review and including it, and I think we felt fairly comfortable with doing that. But now we're looking at cases now where it is truly just failed peer reviews. In the past, we would have taken limited, if any, action on this, usually just requiring they fill out that exemption form so that they're attesting they won't be doing a test work without peer review. But now we can see those documents and see what errors were made. And so we were looking for a little bit of guidance on whether we're still working around whether just not complying with peer review can in and of itself be a violation that doesn't necessarily require a due care analysis. But there's the other side of it too, which is do we want Sherry to look into those documents and ascertain which violations occurred and hold those licensees responsible for those?
Generally, the punishment for a due professional care, I mean, I know we haven't had many, but what is generally the punishment for that?
Penalty is typical. It can't, obviously, if we have something extensive, it can rise up to a license status change. But in the past, it's been civil penalties per violation.
Here's what I was just going to say that's a civil penalty if they wish to stay in the profession and not drop their license, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I would caution us very strongly against having our own investigators getting into this because that is too subjective. I don't know if the standard should be consecutive fails. I don't want us getting into pass with deficiencies. I mean, that's my personal opinion because I think I've been told that that's going to be the new normal in our state. So that could open a whole lot of cases in that instance. As far as the back-to-back fail, I mean, to me, our standards, we've got someone that we farmed this out to, meaning the society. If they get removed from that program, then this board maybe should look into the reasons for such and what that means. But the stuff where I'm reading where people are saying, well, I didn't get paid as much as it would cost me to do a peer review. Well, tough. You can't have your cake and eat it too and say, hey, well, I mean, I didn't make a lot of money on this. I mean, I've done some peer reviews where I didn't make any money on those either. I mean, it happens. So I would suggest that, as far as number 2 on here, I think that, in my opinion, would be a definite no. And I think, the standard ought to be as to whether or not they've been removed or disciplined out of peer review. I mean, kicked out of the program or something of that nature. Because even if they get as long as they're in good standing with the RAB or the oversight agency, then I don't know why we would jump into that.
basically the first one we're dealing with where the firm has been terminated. So they've been
Right.
kicked out for successive less than pass reports.
Is it less than pass or back-to-back
Less
fails?
than pass. So
That's a pass with deficiencies.
probably a pass with deficiencies, then a fail or two fails. As Richard was talking about in his presentation, if you go from fail to pass with deficiencies, that's typically looked at as though you're making improvements, and they'll probably give you the benefit of the doubt.
In this case, this entity received a fail rating in their last report, and then they effectively refused to take remedial action.
Correct. Now, the one caveat here is the firm has thrown up their arms and said, I'm just done. This isn't worth it for me, and I'm not going to do this anymore. So,
I mean, to me, there's already been a mistake made by the respondent. The thing says they were terminated for failure to cooperate. So they've already committed, the sin, if you will. And to me, this is one where they've said, well, we're not going to do it anymore. To me, we ought to have, move this to a hearing with the authority to settle by consent order, where we actually penalize them, and I'm talking about something like $1,000 or whatever. But part of that consent order would be to for them to affirm that they will no longer be doing attestation type work that would require. Oh, I would penalize them because they've already.
I mean, what if they don't pay it? What's our authority if they decide not to pay it?
Well, I guess ultimately we could revoke the certificate.
So first they have to sign the consent order agreeing to pay it. If they don't pay, then their license is typically revoked if that language is in the consent order. If they don't sign the consent order,
This is on the individual, not the
I'm
firm.
sorry, it's on the firm.
Yeah.
But typically we combine them.
Yes.
And we put both their licenses in the consent order.
But if they don't perform a test work anymore, then technically they don't need a firm license. Is that correct?
Correct. Unless they use the title CPA in the name.
Okay, so they can't use. Okay, I forgot
You're
about
right.
that.
So this person could close the firm. Yeah. Correct. So typically that's why we add the individual in there too, because it's
Gotcha.
pretty easy for them to just close the permit and then we can't find them. So we typically include both licenses, and I don't know where I was going. I've lost my.
Seems like.
I'm sorry. Okay, so if they don't sign the consent order, so if they sign the consent order, don't pay, it typically leads to revocation. We give them some time not to, If they don't sign the consent order, then they come to a hearing. Mm-hmm.
It's the 1,000. Is that?
So if you don't attend the hearing, usually I'll still put on, if I was here or whoever will be here, will put on the evidence, and a judge will order the enter anyway. That is still sought for collection, and then on subsequent violations, this board has the authority to ask the Attorney General to enjoin them. So that's an option. Obviously, at the hearing, if they don't attend, you have your whole toolbox with you. So if they're not here at the hearing and you feel that that's happening, you have every right to revoke or suspend that license as well, both individual and the respondent's firm. So that would, obviously, if they then continued to practice, that would be additional violations for unlicensed activity, which we have the authority to take our own action on, or we could start to seek the assistance of outside authorities. We've had some success in East Tennessee, yes, on a case where we had someone who, despite this board eliminating their license, they continued to practice, of local authorities stepping in. And ultimately, no criminal charges were brought, but just the fact that local authorities stepped in shut that down pretty quickly. So we can go outside if we need to and get help.
The biggest concern is this is going to establish precedents for what we do in the future.
Right.
I think it's clear cut that they're in violation of our rules. I agree with Trey that we don't need to start making judgments. I mean, I think our only reason for wanting to have the peer review opened up was to speed up the process of which for us to get this information. Is that right? So, I mean, I'm kind of leaning towards what Casey said, is you would have a formal hearing with the opportunity to.
I would agree.
They sign it and have their firm license revoked. Or or to sign the affidavit saying they won't do a test work.
So my recommendation, without talking to Sarah yet, would be some sort of civil penalty plus the authorization or the signed agreement that they won't do a test work. Then they either agree to that, pay the civil penalty, or if they don't sign it, they end up here in hearing, and then you can assess whatever discipline you want. Outside.
Sarah, do you have a suggested penalty, civil penalty, based on that matrix?
I think $1,000 makes sense.
Is that okay?
I think it would be $1,000 for failure to comply with the peer review requirements.
Seemed low to me,
Yeah,
just based on what we did.
The only problem I have with your recommendation is it enough? I mean,
that was mine too.
If you're not cooperating with the peer review process, is that a serious enough response? That would be my only. I agree with you on the path we're following. I'm not sure about the amount. I think it's low.
I think it's too low.
So it's per violation, so you could feasibly say every day that the peer review attempted to get them to comply and they chose not to constitutes an individual day. I think that is a legally justifiable argument. So I think it gives you leeway on how much you'd like to assess. It may be that you take them all individually and see what kind of work, how many fails, why were they terminated, how cooperative were they with staff when we confronted them, maybe make an assessment there. But thousands would be one violation in and of itself. But again, like Mr. Watkins said, you can very much expand that to include the period of time they were not in
I'm
compliance.
just thinking about the time they're going to look at it takes to get back into compliance if they were to ever do that would be so far in excess of $1,000 penalty. It just makes it seem like a pretty easy out. Just take $1,000, say I'm not going to do it anymore, and then
I'm not hung up on the $1,000.
Yeah.
I just feel like there ought to be a penalty here.
Oh, absolutely.
That was kind of a minimum in my
What do you think
opinion.
that would be a reasonable?
I don't know. I mean, it bothers me that they were not cooperative. And then it's more of, well, okay, fine. I'm going to take my ball and go home. I'm not going to play. So
More like 2,500 or 3,000 is
Yeah,
kind of based on just some things that I'm remembering that we've done with people that have. That's more the ballpark of where it seems reasonable to me.
I guess my only observation, I think the higher you make that penalty, I think, or the higher the chances this could go to a hearing. And I think if you can get this person, I want them to sign a consent order saying they're not going to practice or do attestation work, and they need to pay something for what they've already done or not done. And just the $1,000 was, to me, the bigger part of it's the consent order saying I will not do a test work anymore. That's more important, I think, in terms of the public interest than
what they've already said they're going to do, though, right?
Well, yeah, it does say that they inform their clients that they're not going to engage in a test work, but they inform the clients. But
It's not
I
much
guess
of a
not
penalty. I
signing.
mean, I want to get the signature just like you, Casey. I don't think that's sending any kind of message to
And with this,
to their actions.
And with this, if it helps with this individual, what our practice has been is we totally in agreement with you all. So the minute we see this case, even before we come to you, we send them the exemption form, and this individual has signed that exemption form stating that they would not provide a test work. So our new practice has been the minute they say, "Well, I'm not doing it anymore," they take their ball and go home. We've sent them that form immediately so we can have it recorded. That's what they're saying.
I think maybe $1,000 per substandard peer review. So I mean, that'd be 2 times 2 years, $2,000 plus they sign the consent.
Well, so if they want to come to a hearing, then what is it that we would accomplish at the hearing? What would we try?
They're going to have to tell us why they don't agree with what we've penalized them, right?
I say, okay, well, it's too much, so I can't pay it.
Well, but I mean,
we
we'd
gotta-
have to make an assessment on whether or not we could adjust the penalty, fine, whatever, if the circumstances warranted that. I mean, if they're knowingly doing things the wrong way, I mean, they're not cooperating. I'm sorry, ability to pay at that point, in my mind, you shouldn't be practicing if that's the case.
But I guess that they're saying they're not gonna do it anymore. I'm just trying to figure.
After they said they weren't cooperative. I mean, that's just kind of. I mean, we're holding everybody to a different standard at that point, in my mind.
they should have the cash because they're not going to have to pay for peer review in the future, so they can just use that money instead to pay the fine and be done. I mean, peer review is expensive.
I guess I'm just, trying to be or wanting to be clear what our end game is, given these hearings we've had before. And
my end game purpose would be to do enough to discourage this kind of activity. I mean, I don't want it to pay the fine and be done with it. I mean, I think it needs to be something that's going to not make you want to do it in the future. I mean, that, to me, they were just clearly negligent and just said, "Screw y'all, we're going to do it. Play our rules, not going to follow your rules." And that's what irritates me as a board member. I mean, they've clearly put the public in harm, made our profession look bad.
One of the things Wendy kind of taught me is that if you don't want to participate anymore, that the peer review entities have a process for you to explain to them that you don't intend to engage further, and you will qualifier. That kind of.
So a lot of times, from my experience in peer review, and I don't know, Trey, if you have, but somebody doesn't do well on a peer review or even the second one, they may work with their reviewer in the peer review committee to say, look, I'll sign something for you all saying I won't do this type of work anymore. And typically, the peer review committee will accept that. And then that may have been a decision that they don't refer them for termination because the firm now is cooperating, saying, look, I get it. I don't understand this stuff and I don't need to be doing it. So if this firm had done that, either at the state level or even at the AICPA hearing level, this probably would not be in front of us. But instead, we don't know the details, but it almost seems as though the firm was not responsive and put, quite a bit of work on the program, and now it's here in front of us. So.
But when you say we don't know the details, we don't know the details of why they didn't provide any corrective action or respond. We don't know why.
They don't have to sign this consent order. If they disagree with whatever we're saying, they can appear here and show that evidence that, hey, we did not do that. We're being told one thing. It's up to them to come in and prove whether or not they did something different.
Maybe to kind of recap at least what I'm kind of hearing the board say in terms of trying to focus a motion here, it looks like with respect to question 2, there seems to be consensus not to proceed with independent investigations of these peer review types of findings that we now have access to. And then with respect to the discipline in this case, I guess based on the soundings that I'm hearing, what I would propose is a recommendation of a $2,000 civil penalty. And apparently we've already got their exemption, or their signed notion that they will not be continuing to proceed.
Yes, so Wendy makes a good point. We do have the form that we have everyone sign, but we'll also put in any consent order. By signing this consent order, you are agreeing you will not enroll in. You have to roll in peer review before a test. So double duty, right? Never hurts. So.
Okay. So I guess I would make that in the form of a motion that we would,
I would second that motion.
Offer a $2,000 penalty, and then the consent order indicating that they will not be continuing to do activities that would subject them to peer review.
We've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion of this motion?
I just want to just say that because it sounds like we don't have some level of detail, if we end up in a hearing and then get this detail, then I mean it could be a waste of time versus if there's an opportunity to get some more detail as to why they didn't. We can't.
This is all we got.
See, that's
the respondent in this case has responded, and they admit that they just chose to discontinue responding, that they didn't want to engage in it anymore. So, and we've asked in the past, Sherry has as well, whether there are extra circumstances we should be aware of, and this respondent did not give any, but rather just said, frustrated with it, wasn't doing it enough, not making him enough money for the cost and time, I'm done with it. So if you were to show up in a hearing and say, during that time I had some sort of medical emergency, that would be brand new, but he has been quite engaged with us and emailing with us probably almost every other week or so to update me. So I don't think this one would be a surprise one, but to your point, that doesn't mean the other ones won't be in the future. So
okay. Okay,
I'm knock on wood, right?
I was going to say, Sarah, if after the consent order came, he received that. If he came back with something additional, couldn't you just represent to the board
Yes.
before a hearing as well?
Which is common, as you can tell from our
Yeah.
report this time. We have a lot of represents for exactly that. I noticed in the last two hearings that
represented
yes,
something else.
I've been trying to be more liberal with that since I know the last two hearings we've ended up where things came out that the board wanted to know. And so we've been much more generous in allowing people to come back a second time so that we can make sure you all have all of that before we're here with the judge.
We appreciate that a great deal.
Of course.
Very much appreciated.
Me too.
Okay.
Okay, is there any further discussion of the motion? Okay, let's have a roll call vote. Wendy?
Casey Stewart,
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge,
Aye.
Gay Moon,
Aye.
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
Larry Elmore, Kevin Monroe,
Aye.
Trey Watkins,
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
I even have the names right.
Okay, motion passes.
Motion carries.
All right. Kevin?
All right, so we'll go through the representation section, which is cases, I believe, 16 through 26. And as Sarah kind of set the stage for this, these are situations where the board has taken previous action, but there may be new facts or new surroundings around the case that they felt it was important to go back to the board for their guidance on these matters. Case 16 is a very, classic case in point. Unfortunately, the respondent has passed away, and so the recommendation there is to close that particular case. Case 17 is another case where we've got a self-reported situation where the respondent was named with other defendants, and that larger action basically was dismissed. And so really recommendation is to close because there's no basis on which to proceed. 18 is an unlicensed activity case where we'd previously authorized a hearing and with authority to settle via consent order. The new information now here is that this person has moved to Florida. He basically, when he was made aware of the problem, he referred his client to a licensed CPA who went on to complete the review and has promised, without reservation that he will not violate these again, and apologized also to the board and staff. So the recommendation is to close, but with a letter of warning in that particular case. Case 19 is a CPE situation where, and this gets to the point where we've discussed, I think, at one of our earlier board meetings. I think historically, if someone was sending in their CPE and they were basically saying we it's not adequate, we aren't presenting enough hours here. Our at least our former position was we would approve and then I guess wait for it to come out in an audit. And I think we're in that situation, particularly now that we're moving to a situation where they're going to be listing their CPE up front. It seems to me the time to catch that is at that time and simply not to renew their license if they are not, if they don't have the adequate CPE, once we get the system in place here to address that. That the previous recommendation was to, actually, I'm not seeing the representation case in number 19 here, so it looks like we've authorized the revocation of respondent's license because he stated that he would accept that in lieu of the civil penalty.
$1,000 and 120 hours. That's right.
Okay. 20 is another peer review case. The update on this one is that the respondent's Kentucky license was voluntarily revoked in light of a failure to ensure a client's 990s were timely filed, and now the respondent wishes to accept the revocation of their licenses. So the recommendation on representation is to accept that voluntary revocation in lieu of a civil penalty. 21 is a representation whereby we have an expired license and a civil penalty was previously authorized for operating on an expired license and for issuing a test work without being enrolled in peer review. The update on this here is that the respondent stated that he had submitted his renewals online but was ejected or rejected due to outstanding privilege. thought that when he paid the privilege taxes, it would automatically move his application through, and it did not. Subsequently, he is also enrolled in peer review. So the representation recommendation is to drop the civil penalty from $6,000 to $4,000 and issue a letter of warning with respect to his expired licenses. Case number 22 is a situation where the board assessed previously a $1,000 civil penalty and requested respondent to complete a 4-part ethics CPE module within 90 days. However, one of those modules was simply not available for that respondent to complete. So the recommendation on representation is to require him or her to complete the first 3 general ethics modules within 90 days of the execution of the consent order, which those are available, and to remove the requirement that the respondent complete the state ethics module. For 23, the previous recommendation, this involved a person whose license in North Carolina was revoked for a 3-year period. The previous recommendation was to suspend the respondent's Tennessee license to run concurrently with the North Carolina discipline. The new information that has been obtained since that recommendation was adopted was that the respondent met in person with the staff to discuss the matter related specifically to a payroll tax issue not for a client, but with the respondent's own firm. And the respondent has since changed the management of that area of that practice. And it looks like, in addition, they say for context only of the action of other jurisdictions, the complaint was reviewed by Florida, and Florida closed the matter without formal action. So they basically accepted the remediation that the individual had undertaken. So the new recommendation there is to close this one upon issuance of a letter of warning. Case 24 is an unlicensed activity case where we had previously assessed a $1,000 civil penalty for unlicensed activity because the respondent issued a review without having an active firm or CPA license in Tennessee. He was licensed in Georgia but did not have a firm permit. And since that matter, the respondent has passed away. So the recommendation is to now close this one. And then case 25, we have a suspension issue where in this particular case, the respondent was disciplined by the PCAOB and they imposed a civil penalty of $75,000. Our previous recommendation that we adopted was to authorize the suspension of the respondent's license to run concurrently with the PCAOB's discipline, and that was revoking the firm's registration for a 5-year period. The new information that has come forth essentially relates, to greater information about his background and his practice experience here. And so the new recommendation is to take into account those mitigating factors, to recommend payment of a $1,000 civil penalty and license being placed on probation until a letter of completion is provided from the National Peer Review Committee on the firm's March 31, 2016 review. Also, during the probationary period, the respondent must disclose the probation to any clients, and respondent must inform the board of any engagements with Tennessee clients. Upon receipt of the completion letter, the matter will be brought back to the board for reinstatement of the license pending review of any disciplinary actions. In this particular case, Sarah, I think there's also some additional information that was not presented in the new recommendation. I think that would be relevant for consideration regarding a subsequent peer review failure.
Yes. So since we received, we completed this section of the report, we've learned that that there has been on that March 16th peer review a compliance plan has been presented and is making its way through the process. However, I believe there was a subsequent fail on another peer review that needs to be addressed. I don't know did I misspeak on that, Sherry? I think you emailed me. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull it up.
Let's take that and look at that. Let's see.
Yes.
Yeah, he failed the last one. The previous one was a pass with deficiency. And then the one we're talking about for the period ending March 31st, 2016 was a fail.
Okay, so he had one prior to 2016 that was a pass with deficiency, or a fail, and then this one was passed with deficiency.
Oh, just the opposite. Just the opposite.
Just the opposite.
He's going backwards.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Sherry.
And I was going to just add, based on what we saw on the peer review presentation, this one is at risk. It doesn't say definitely, but it's at risk that he may be terminated because of having the two not pass and going backwards, based on Mr. Hill's presentation.
So our understanding at this point is he is working to come into compliance and correct that peer review. I contacted the legal counsel for this respondent and let them know that that would be something we were looking for, and that was very important to us, that they make sure that they're complying with everything peer review is asking for, and make sure they provide us proof that they have checked all those boxes. So they are aware that that is a potential this board could look for as teeth when looking at these other issues.
I think on this one, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like us to vote and deliberate on this one, case number 25, separately, because I think there may be some divergence in the revised recommendation here. I know I was uncomfortable with that, actually, myself, personally, after reviewing that, and then particularly after hearing about his peer review status.
One of these.
Yes.
Okay. I guess I personally took issue with item 21, based on this dude's, or whoever it is, their history. I mean, we've got in 2011, we've got a $1,000 civil penalty for a late page privilege tax and failing to respond to the complaint. And then we've got another one for not registering the firm in an untimely peer review. And now we're going back and have another one where they failed to respond to the complaint. And I mean, this guy's got or whoever this is, has got an excuse for everything. I mean, that just to me is just an outright deliberate, just thumb my nose up at the profession and say I'm not gonna do what you tell me to do until you finally get them down, and then there's a bunch of excuses.
Right, and that's
What's the point? I mean, we justified the $6,000 fee by saying $2,000 for operating on expired licenses, $3,000 for issuing a test work without being enrolled in peer review, and $1,000 for failing to respond to the complaint. I mean, he knows how to not respond to complaints because he's done that numerous times. How do you get it to $4,000? Because I just personally, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I have a problem dropping it. I mean, to me, I don't think he's done anything less except he finally responded to us.
Right. I don't disagree. I think if the board disagrees with this recommendation, it's reasonable. My thought on it was that he did provide at least some proof that these beliefs were true. I agree with you. Obviously, the history would indicate he has an issue with complying. He's been in pretty frequent contact with me, showing how he's trying to comply now, a little late, but still nonetheless complying. Truly, my reason for bringing this back was it was new information that I figured would come out in a hearing, and we'd rather know now. And two, he's likely to sign it, so we won't have to have the hearing. And I figure at this point, $6,000 and $4,000 are already in quite excess of what we normally do. So I felt like even by reducing it to $2,000, by offering him a little bit of something, we were still getting a penalty that I would deem quite steep in comparison to what we've done in the past. Even in light of the discipline, since those were lower penalties, $1,000, $250.
If we choose to do it, that's majority rules. I personally want to make sure that the $1,000 for responding to the complaint is allocated in there specifically.
Yeah, the reduction of the $2,000 is only related to the expired license.
That's right. And so I wanted to make sure that was still recorded.
He's going to get a letter of warning for that non-compliance issue rather than $2,000 penalty.
But he did operate on an expired license.
Yeah. So the mitigating factors, he says, are that his renewal didn't go through because he didn't pay his professional privilege tax. He thought when he paid the tax that it would automatically go through, which it did not. And so he claims he misunderstood.
Before I hear that, it's just like is this real? Or are we being punked? I mean, I just feel. I mean, who would do that? I mean, and we've done it before. And what's to say, based on the history there, he's going to do it again, or could do it again? Probably will. I mean, at least if he had responded timely when we asked him the first time, I may feel different, and especially the second time, I may feel different. But I just don't. I mean, I think that's just pretty ridiculous. And I mean, and then I think operating without the license, I don't know that maybe the 3,000 should be reduced. I mean, it's all semantics, but I mean, he did do that, and he failed to respond to us. And then finally, when we beat him down and said, you got to do something, well, I'll talk now. That's just my opinion. Pretty irritated about that.
Oh yeah, same. To be honest.
Dude doesn't even practice.
What I'd recommend there on 21 is that we'll treat that separately as a
Okay.
separate vote, if that's all right, Mr.
Sure,
Chair.
you got one more case.
We
that,
do. Case number 26, and this is one that probably would be good to have a little bit of background from staff on this item. This is a case where effectively it's basically use of the word accountant, or in this case, the Spanish equivalent of the word accountant in practice signage. The original recommendation was to basically have a consent order with an assessment of a civil penalty of $1,000. The new information is that the respondent has been completely now forthcoming in removing all designations from all signs containing the reference to accounting services in English or in Spanish, and has verified that that has been done. And so, Sarah, I think there's a little bit of background here that the board would benefit from.
Sure. I know in discussion with Kevin, we were concerned because I think it goes back to what Stephen was saying on the last case, but don't we know he did this? So why would we reduce the penalty? The thought on this was from a strategic standpoint. In the past, we have done letters of warning on folks that come into voluntary compliance. This one did take a while, and maybe we wouldn't have brought that. However, I hate to get into payment and legal things, but I think sometimes it's important for decision making. With this case, this individual is a young student in law school, has discontinued practice, and is very adamant they will not be paying the penalty or cannot pay the penalty, and therefore we know we will be going to a hearing on this. And what that will require from us, because of the language difference, will be the hiring of an expert in accounting terminology use in Spanish. And so it will be a quite extensive and expensive hearing process in light of a $1,000 penalty for someone no longer practicing and in compliance. And so obviously I agree. That's why we wanted to make sure there was a letter to indicate, just in case this person comes back or we see it again. But the belief, this is cases with Shalina, so I'm speaking on her behalf, and I hope she forgives me if she's listening. But the thought was this is probably not the best use of the board's resources since we have got them to come into compliance.
Can we put some penalty CPE hours that would have to be completed if the person decides to come back about maybe learning the rules of our profession?
They're not licensed, so you could ask, but I wouldn't have any teeth to acquire it.
This person's not a CPA.
That's exactly right. That's why that's the problem.
It's an unlicensed activity
That's right.
case.
Does he do booking services like gaming, or is it bookkeeping services?
Tax work was almost, I think, exclusively. Sherry went and visited.
He does tax work, and
I didn't know if he was running, no.
well, the individual does do multiple. The individual does do multiple things.
Okay.
There is tax work involved. There's accounting and bookkeeping work that's
Okay.
done, and he does sell insurance.
Okay. Well, it says booking services, so
Yeah.
my mind went to
What we
it.
usually
Should've been
do
bookkeeping.
when we catch somebody that's operating, basically he's operating as a bookkeeping firm, but it's using the word accounting, at least in our opinion. What do we generally do with that?
In the
Letter of
past,
warnings?
we've done letters if they've come into voluntary compliance, usually in a pretty quick period of time. This one took a little longer for us to get to. He was closed, he wasn't there, things like that. But we have often, if we contact an unlicensed person that we've never seen them before, they're not offering a test services, we've allowed them to quickly come into voluntary compliance on a letter.
Was it intentional to delay the responses, or was it just bad luck of catching him?
It could be all of that. The honest truth is he's a young guy. He's in school. I think when he got the letter, he was, I think, very flustered and upset and didn't really want to engage in this kind of stressful process. And then, speaking from a young law student, maybe over-empowered, kind of wanted to delay and play that game a little bit. It's a little tempting when you have enough knowledge to be dangerous, I think. So,
Help us, out of curiosity.
how did that come to be, Sherry?
We actually had a formal complaint filed by an individual from the public that was a CPA.
In light of what G, is we probably should correct that typo
I would agree. We can correct that for the minutes. I'll make sure. I'll make sure Shalina knows too, because she'll think that's funny. I think.
We offer booking services.
Well, with that,
actually read it.
Oh, I see it right there.
Yeah, I missed it. That's impressive.
Yes, it
That was
is.
good, and we've reviewed this quite a bit, so that's a good catch. We looked right over
Excellently caught.
Service we're going to start off.
So, what I would suggest, if Mr. Chairman, if the board's amenable to this, is that we go ahead and vote separately on case 21 and on case 25, and then deal with the remaining cases in this batch together, unless there are any other thoughts to pull out one or more of the cases separately for voting.
Chair will entertain a motion.
Okay. With respect to case number 21, I guess for purposes of discussion, I will move that the board accept the recommendation, the revised recommendation as recommended by staff.
Second.
Motion is second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we need a roll call vote.
Casey Stewart,
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge,
No.
Gay Moon,
Aye.
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pamela Church,
Aye.
Larry Elmore, Kevin Monroe,
No.
Trey Watkins,
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion passes with 2
Votes.
no votes.
Okay. Okay, Kevin.
Okay, the next item to be voted on separately is case number 25. And with that, I will go ahead and make a recommendation or a motion that the board accept the revised recommendation on the part of staff, which is to recommend that the respondent pay a $1,000 civil penalty and be placed on probation until a letter of completion is provided from the National Peer Review Committee on the firm's March 31, 2016 report.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion of this motion?
Although I made the motion, I actually, given this person's history and their subsequent peer review issues, I'm planning to vote no on the motion, meaning that our original suspension during the period of the PCOB suspension would still take place.
So someone else would need to make the motion.
No, the motion's fine. I
okay.
I just didn't want to catch anybody by surprise here.
That would have caught me by surprise. Thank you.
Okay, any further comments or discussion on the motion?
So you think this is not enough?
I think the original recommendation that we've already approved, which was to basically suspend him for the period that the PCOB had suspended him, was the right punishment, if you will, for this situation. And I was bothered when I found out about the subsequent peer review fail, and I realized things kind of collapse on practitioners, and I'm I know how the PCOB can be because I see that firsthand every day. But
I'm reading this as he had to have a separate QC review. I get that. I know the rule, and they dinged him. Was it 135 times over a 3-year period, or what was the?
Well, so
probably understand this better than any of us.
So just
why I'm asking.
by way of background, so the after the Bernie Madoff scandal, the PCOB, Sarbanes-Oxley was actually revised to give the PCOB jurisdiction over broker-dealer audits, which they did not have before. You had to be a public registrant. So in this case, this guy did a lot of broker-dealer audits, and apparently from the facts that are presented, he acted as his own concurring reviewer on that. And so the PCOB failed every one of the audits that he had done over the period that he presented, and they suspended him and barred him from practice of public accounting before them for 5 years. And so in our prior discipline, we accepted that recommendation. And I guess in my view, I think that's still appropriate and that we should do nothing. In other words, we should not adopt the recommended view.
Because when I'm starting to read that, I'm like, okay, he's supposed to do this as a rule, but this isn't a numbers issue. This is a compliance. call it their rule regulation, but I don't know that preventing him from practicing is appropriate. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, the PCOB has barred him from practicing.
PCOB work.
And we did too.
Right.
Well, ours
We
is
suspended his
broader
license, yeah.
because when we suspend his license, it affects all his work.
And that's why I'm curious. And I just, again, you do more public work than, well, you do probably the only public work on this board, I would guess. But my question is does that seem overly harsh to suspend his entire license? And I'm asking a question. This is not necessarily that he issued a bad, in PCOB's mind, he issued a bad opinion because he did not follow this rule. But it is not like a situation where this guy didn't test numbers, or as far as we know, he attested to everything in the financial statements. He just didn't do the concurring review properly.
Evidently from the facts, and far be it from me, I'm the last person to basically want to defend the PCAOB. I have my issues with them and the underlying legislation, which I could go on and on about, but they were probably coming to get me. But I mean, there's an explicit standard. Once he signed an opinion that said under PCOB standards, well, he had to comply with standard number 7, which talks explicitly about engagement quality control reviews, right. And he did not evidently do that. And for the PCOB to take that kind of action, I don't think it is serious. They didn't do it lightly, and there's a whole lot of due process that had to have taken place to get to that point. And so when we said, well, we'll suspend during that 5-year period, I felt that was a justifiable action. And I still do. And so, I will not be voting in favor of the mitigated, the revised recommendation, but I realize that's just a matter of judgment for however people want to individually vote, and that's perfectly fine. But in my view, this was not something where the PCOB went overboard.
I don't disagree that the PCOB went overboard because that's their rule.
Yeah.
And the fact that he can't practice under PCOB standards, I fully agree with. So he violated their rules. He should not, if that's the rule they want to impose, that's it. But now this board has taken away his ability to do any other type of accounting work or a test work.
Yes.
Which to me seems...
I think I'm right where you are, Trey, on this. I mean, to me, there are two separate issues, one being the ability to practice before the PCAOB, and I share your feelings about the PCAOB, Kevin. But that's one issue. The other is a peer review issue, and the fact that this guy may be back here before this board and before too long, where we're taking action similar to the other case that we had where if he is terminated from the peer review program, and it seems like he's still got a breath of air there. He may be going down for the third time, but he's going to have to do some serious corrective action and cooperation in order to stay in the peer review program. But if he gets dropped or terminated from peer review, he could very well be back before the board. Where we would do something similar to what we did on the other case where we try to get a consent order where he agrees not to do a test work anymore. But I agree with you. I think it's too harsh to just say we're going to suspend your license and therefore you can't practice any kind of accounting work. Because I think there's still one more little bit of due process that needs to take place before we get there. So I will be voting in favor of Kevin's motion, just for the record.
Roll call vote.
Is there more discussion? I mean, it's a fairly complicated issue, and I think you've spent some time on this, extra time, have you not, on this?
That's another case.
Is that another one?
That's
okay.
In process,
all right.
Yeah.
Then let's have a roll call vote. Wendy?
Casey Stewart.
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pamela Church.
Aye.
Larry Elmore. Kevin Monroe.
Nope.
Trey Watkins.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion carries with 1 no vote.
I think that leaves us with the last batch, which is voting on cases number 16 through 26, excluding the ones we voted on separately already, 21 and 25. And so I would make a motion that we approve the recommended disciplinary actions in those cases 16 through 26, excluding cases 21 and 25, which we've already voted on.
Okay, we got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion is second. Is there any discussion of this motion? Wendy, let's have a roll call vote very quickly.
Casey Stewart.
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pamela Church.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Trey Watkins.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
The motion carries, and again, Kevin, thank you very much for your willingness to stand in as chair of that committee.
Thanks for your patience, and I know I was trying to fill big shoes with respect to Gabe and fervently hope that he can continue on in his capacity here.
And members of I do have one small verbal issue just to get your approval on, if that's all right. Kind of came up last minute, or to give you something in writing. We had a respondent accept a consent order and pay a penalty for not being enrolled in peer review when it was necessary. They had a requirement to be re-enrolled in peer review within 180 days due to some extra circumstances this board took into consideration, gave her a longer period to become enrolled. She has since reached out to the board on her renewal and has assigned a test form stating that she is no longer wishing to engage in any attest work. Obviously, that runs into a problem because she has a signed order with this board that says she will enroll in peer review. So I had her go ahead and pre-sign a modification of that consent order stating that she understands the peer review requirements, that she's providing the exemption form, and that then I would bring that verbally to you all to approve that modification. Typically, we have that as a second option in those kinds of cases until this report when we've moved in a different direction. And so I went ahead and had her sign it just to make sure she was serious and send in the form. But if this board's comfortable with that, our intent is to modify that entered consent order and allow the renewal of the license based on the fact that she's paid her penalty and that she's attested that she won't do it.
There was no payment. There was
That's right. This is one where we only wanted her to enroll in penalty. That's right. I forgot.
Okay. I was going to ask, would the penalty have been different had we?
She's not going to choose to enroll in peer review. She's going to keep her CPA license and just do non-attest work.
That's correct.
Is there if she decides, say, 2 years from now to re-enroll in peer review, is there any kind of penalty or any kind of thing she has to jump through, or is she free to do so?
Not in terms of this board. She will have to go before the peer review board of the AICPA to get back in. She was terminated. So this is similar to the case we talked about earlier. She was terminated for failing to comply. I believe hers was failing to cooperate by, can't think of the right words, failing to do corrective actions to make improvements. Just she was not able to remediate. The RAB gave her corrective actions to do. Those either did not come back or did not come back sufficiently that they were happy that she made improvements.
We don't know that. It's just that she didn't. We don't get the details. Is that right?
Right. We just know that she was terminated because she did not do that.
So would we have had a fine if we had known she because I know sometimes we make decisions because the cost of enrolling in peer review is I don't want to say excess, but it's a lot. So we usually choose to allow them to do that in lieu of a fine, right? So would there have been a fine?
I think if we are, to be honest, I think if we're treating this similarly to the other one we talked about today, we would have assessed a fine. Mm-hmm.
But we've already moved beyond that point, have we not? You're just talking about, and I guess maybe that doesn't matter. We can back up and start all over again. But you've already had her sign a consent order. Is that what I understood?
Signed a consent order based on the recommendation of this board already, and so it's entered with a deadline set for her based on this previous recommendation. With that, so the only thing, since she was terminated in peer review and we've had other things come up, did she ever pay? She paid penalty for something else. Yes, so there's a history here, and so Yes, I believe she appeared in person before this board in order to be reinstated, and as a result, we concluded and wrapped up this trying to get everyone back onto track and into compliance. We went forward to say, okay, you've been terminated. We know it's going to take a lot longer to get back in peer review. Here's 180 days. Sign the order, get back in. And now she said, I'm not capable of doing this. I'm not going to be doing it anymore. And so I don't want to have to re-enroll in peer review, and I don't want to perform a test work. I'd like to just do a tax practice. Is that an option that I can have so that she can move forward with her practice?
I'll be honest. I mean, I may be in the minority here on this, but I think this needs to be represented to us without making a decision like that. Because I mean, there's more facts pertinent to this. I think that we need to consider doing this.
Any reason you couldn't do what Stephen suggested? We do it at the May meeting?
No, we've allowed her to renew. The issue is, I think she may violate that consent order prior to that meeting, and she was trying to make sure she did not do that.
About getting in peer review?
Right, because she won't likely be able to do it.
The deadline is February something.
Yes.
I mean, grant an extension to the meeting for this circumstance, I think, I guess.
Absolutely. I think that's a completely reasonable way to address it, which is even though she signed that order, I told her right away, I said, this is just for me. The board has to approve it, and they could say no. And so she understands that. And so I think that's a very reasonable, if we want to go ahead and just say you're not going to be in violation of the consent order for, maybe 180 more additional days, but we will be considering this matter at the May meeting on what you want us to do. And I can have her maybe submit in writing whether that's a plan of how she wants her business to work, whatever information you all would want to see that would make you feel comfortable one way or the other. That's a completely reasonable solution.
It's just a proposal of what she's expecting to happen, what she plans to do and wants to happen. But I'd like to see the history on that case.
You would like to have some action approved on the part of this board today.
But otherwise, her license would be revoked automatically in February, and I don't have any authority to modify that without you all.
Let's make sure I'm correct, but I would make a motion that we extend that consent order so that she wouldn't be in violation of it to the May board meeting for us to revisit all the facts and come up with a new resolution again.
I think that would work fine. We just make it almost like an indefinite hold on that enforcement action until we make our next decision.
We've got a motion. Is there a second? We've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Let's have another roll call vote. Wendy?
Casey Stewart.
Aye.
Stephen Eldridge.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pamela Church.
Aye.
Larry Elmore. Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Trey Watkins.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay.
I was going to vote no to my motion.
Thank you all so much. I know I had some weird ones in there this time around. I really appreciate
You
it.
have 1 minute to ask for clarification on one of these cases.
Absolutely.
On that, Larry. No, you go ahead and ask your question.
I don't know if Wendy can answer it or if legal needs to answer it, but on number 4, I can't get the math to work. And 160, 36 were accepted, and he's got a 68-hour deficiency. How does that math work?
You know what? We corrected this on one of our versions, and I think we sent it. We had many working edited versions. I think we did correct this at one point. I'm so sorry.
There's something missing there.
Yes, we will fix that because we had fixed it in a previous edition, and we've got our wires crossed on one of them. But the moral of the story is the ones that they needed to make up was the rest of them, and that they did provide all of those. But we will fix it because it should be.
That may have
with penalty hours.
with penalty hours.
Okay.
Based on what they did or didn't get, because there's a max.
Just go back and check that
We
out.
will.
Being an auditor, that doesn't work for me.
Because they get 8 penalty hours per category, and I don't always break those down because it gets a little heavy.
There's a max of 40 penalty hours you can
Maybe build that into the narrative here.
I will fix that to make sure when it goes in the minutes I'll put the chart in there of what was required and what was sent. So we'll get that right. Thank you for pointing that out. We appreciate that.
Anything else on legal Kevin. Okay, we're ready to move to laws and rules, and you're chair.
Okay, there's been several references to the continuous testing and the changes that will be coming up possibly. The materials that were passed out to us earlier, the first page is a representative of the draft of the model rules. Proposed changes to Rule 5-7 little a2. And these are the model rules. And basically it is eliminating the testing windows, establishing continuous testing, and this will allow the CPA candidate upon receipt of the grades for the upon receipt of their grades. So then on the second page, we have the Tennessee rules that have been changed. And today we're just going to have a very brief discussion. We don't have to decide on anything, is my understanding, but we may have some questions for staff to look at after our discussion. So looking at the different pieces, this is Rule 0020-01-.06, and I'm just going to call it 6 with the little a. That first piece is eliminating the description of they have 6 3-month exam cycles in which to complete the exam, and they're replacing that with the 18 months from the actual date the candidate takes the test. Then in little a1, we are removing the description of 4 test sections and just keeping test sections. There is the chance that they will revise the exam structure, and we're trying to be a little proactive and not have to go through this process again. Then little a2, we are adding the comment subject to subsection 6 little a2 capital B, that if the continuous testing is passed, that section will be replaced. Then item B, let's see, we're at 6 little a 2 capital B, is talking about if the board determines the examination system changes are necessary to eliminate the window limitations, then that earlier section A is eliminated, subsection A is eliminated. Have I lost y'all totally? I know. Then item 3, again, eliminates the number 4 and is only referencing test sections. And it also is inserting 18 months as opposed to the 6 3-month cycles for passing the exam. I'm confused. I understand we're going to have a real time crunch when NASBA or the uniform rules or model rules are such that we want this continuous testing. And so I know it takes us some time, and we're going to want to get on board quickly. So we want to do this proactively. But I have a couple of concerns. Do we have to have a rule change in order for 6 little a 2 capital B to fall into place? Because what's going to trigger saying that that subsection A is no longer applicable? Is that going to be a rule change?
Well, B, by inserting B, when the board determines that the examination system changes are necessary to eliminate the window limitations have been implemented, then Section A would no longer qualify. So that's being added to basically give us the option to flip the switch whenever the national testing groups say, okay.
We don't have to have another rule change.
No.
Okay.
I mean, at somewhere down the road, we'll clean it up, but we won't need one.
basically you have 18 months from the day you take the first part of the exam, first section you take
That you pass.
Mm-hmm. To pass all 4 parts, assuming you don't want to have anything expire, and you can take it as many times as you possibly can in that 18 months, as long as once you get your grades back, you.
Correct.
I thought you had to wait 2 months.
Now you do.
Okay.
But
Okay.
Changing that.
That's what we're trying to eliminate. So basically what we'd be saying here is once you receive your grades, you may immediately schedule.
Idea,
And would the,
the previous 2 month period and having that delay was to give them time to refresh the exam and put new material in there, whatever. And there's just, I assume as part of this continuing testing, they're going to be able to do that immediately. I mean, they're going to be continually updating the exam and so forth. And all the discussion I've heard at NASBA and from other states, I mean, I did visit a couple of different state boards. Nobody sees any downside to doing this. I mean, it's really going to. I saw in this language changes that are here, like we're getting rid of where it says all 4 test sections. We're just saying all required test sections because we could wind up with this new committee where they come up with, we could wind up with 6 sections or something going forward and just avoid. I mean, I just think it's a good change, going forward.
On a computer in a gym.
Might be one.
This guy was running track above.
But again, you said we don't need to decide today, but I think this is good just for my comments.
I think Gay had
The language
another.
is good.
There's one other item, by replacing the 6 3-month cycles with an 18-month period. There is a little issue with the way Tennessee has interpreted that, I believe, and applied it. And until the new testing rules come into play, I am concerned that we would not be consistent with some of the candidates because we are talking about a strict 18-month, whereas before it might not be a strict 18-month. And Wendy, you might want to explain to them. I want us to be fair to the candidates.
Okay, so the way it read before was that, let's see. Sorry, I don't have it. Okay, in 6a3, it said, before any changes, that in the event a candidate does not pass all 4 test sections of the exam within the next 3-month cycle, within the next 6 3-month cycles. So when you under the cycle process, so let's say you took the exam on May 15th, the first part, you get 6 windows after that, and we would let you go till the end of the window. So in some cases, you would get more than 18 months. But you are limited. You can't retest in the same window. So if you see it as a disadvantage, Karen actually brought up a possible way around that. Could be, if we have any issues like that, y'all could give me authority to grant an extension based on the fact that we have that authority to some degree, or you could decide this is just the route we're taking. Or I could bring each one of those, to the board if there are any. I mean, we're talking about a matter of a couple of weeks.
Right.
Typically, I can't imagine it would be, maybe at the most at 6 weeks.
I would be happy for y'all to do that. I just don't want people that don't have the option of this continuous testing to not have the same time.
Right. So I think what
available.
she's saying, just to make sure everybody's clear, is if we make this rule change, and let's just say for hypothetical reasons, this rule change goes into effect September 1st of this year, but we're not ready for continuous testing yet. That means that it's okay we're not ready, but now we've inserted this 18-month requirement. So we're being stringent about our 18 months. And even
on the front end.
even though there's still windows in place, we're now going on a strict 18-month.
You're not talking about somebody 2 years from now that says, "Well, I registered on it on the 2 days before the 18 months was up. I should still qualify since I was registered for it." No. This is just a phase
for
in
initial
portion.
implementation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Mm-hmm. I think the outside of that implementation, it's strict. It's 18 months.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
care
I think what she's saying is we would get the 18 months in place, but yet the windows wouldn't have been completely gone away yet, and you have that limbo period where you could have some folks, and I would just ask NASBA to bring those to my attention.
I just want to make sure that we were
Don't
being fair,
disadvantage anybody.
that we're not putting anybody at a worse place.
Wendy, what's the timing of getting this into a proposed rule change? And
So, I drafted this. I haven't had legal look at it based on the fact we've been down an attorney and a few paralegals and such. So I drafted this just so you all could see as quickly as possible what this would look like, get your feedback. And I was hopeful that I could bring you something final at the May meeting to vote on. And then we're talking 6-9 months. We might have it effective by the beginning of 2020, which is what we're shooting for.
Did a good job.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got one question. In Rule 20-01, .06, Section 6D, at the bottom, should we change that to be a candidate shall be deemed to have passed the uniform CPA examination once the candidate holds the same time valid credit for passing each of the required?
Yes.
I was going to point that
Good
out
catch.
as well.
Attorneys? Who said we're short on attorneys?
That's right.
Okay, I kind of decided I was going to hold off on this, and then at the last minute I thought, you know what, let's just get it in front of them and make and kind of weed out some of the issues. Oh, do you have any feedback, I suppose, for the exposure draft? I couldn't think of anything, but okay.
So let me just make sure I have this right. There would be no dead periods anymore. Is that right?
That's
We
correct.
usually have every third month dead period.
Correct.
None of that.
Correct. Keep in mind that when we change this rule, let's say the rule is effective in September, like I said, we still won't move to continuous testing until nationally they say we're ready. And the reason for that is because it's my understanding that they really would like to move most all states at the same time. They don't want 20 states moving to continuous testing and the other states not have that option. It makes for some inconsistencies and some problems with substantial equivalency. So, but with almost all states needing a statute or rule change, we've got to get moving in some fashion.
Yeah. Okay. Seems like in the old days they used to say that grades were sort of curved for each test window. Is that a thing of the past? Is there such a thing?
Grading of the exam is so complicated. I don't believe that's really accurate, but we have been assured by the AICPA and Michael Decker and the team there that they have analyzed this up and down and around and have no problem moving forward with it.
Okay.
Wendy, Stephen just brought up a good point with me is, do we need to, I mean, NASBA is asking for feedback, or the Uniform Accountancy Committee, I guess, is asking for feedback, and what I hear is we're generally in support of these changes. Is that correct? So I don't know if you need to give them that feedback, or if Andy can do that through his, well, you got to do it by February, so.
February 9th or 11th. So, I mean, I can put something quickly together that documents our support and let you sign it for sure.
I don't even think it needs to be that formal.
Okay.
I was just thinking even a phone call or an email or something, just say we discussed at our board meeting, and, you know, while we didn't vote or take any action, we were generally supportive of, yeah. Is that okay? Okay, that takes us down to the executive committee, and I believe everyone got the fiscal year 19 year-to-date financial results. And I'm going to let Wendy, she's got some written commentary and explanations, and I'm going to let her go through that. But the one thing that jumps out at me on those financials is the increase of our cost backs and where we expect to wind up the year. And I guess a big part of that, Wendy, is the fact they're now tracking legal time by the hour as opposed to just doing some kind of arbitrary proration of that. So you want to make some comments or supplement your written comments with some kind of verbal commentary?
Sure. I'll start on the net position statement, which is your first page of that document. And just highlight down here before we kind of walk into the other ones. But our licensing revenue is $344,560 so far year to date. This is for November 30 month end. Our case revenue is down, so we've only seen about $8,000 so far in case revenue. That brings our total revenue less the state regulatory fee to $327,679 year to date. So this is, I think, just about 3% off of the prior year. So we're for the most part in line, and of course December will be our next big revenue month with renewals. A majority of the renewals happening in December. So down under expenses on your net position statement, those Edison expenditures are what I will detail out on the next two pages. And then below that, I don't think I've done a good job in the past. These are your cost backs broken down into where they fall. So your admin cost backs is the largest chunk of that at $69,729, and that's generally for regulatory boards division. So that's the assistant commissioner's office, director of operations, so areas that support regulatory boards at a higher level. Centralized complaints at $2,558. This is related to the centralization of the intake and the administrative function of complaints. There's a group that handles that, so those are costs received from that. Legal cost backs is where Casey noted, and I think we've noted in previous meetings, we're seeing a significant uptick there in legal cost backs. Of course, November was much lower because we're down an attorney. So we've a little bit more reasonable, but I don't expect that it will stay there. So we are, I think, a little over, we're double what we were last year at this time with regards to legal cost backs. And then the customer service center is when you call in our general number, that's been centralized to a call center of sorts. And so the amount we're charged there is related to the tickets that come in, and we're at about $5,000 for the year.
Does that mean that investigations with no cost, we've handled all of ours internally?
Right, correct. So if I had somebody on the investigative team, like I couldn't have Sherry do it and I needed somebody else, then we would be charged for that. But we don't have any because we pay for her. There are no CPAs on that team. Did you have a question, Pam? Judy?
No.
I do. On the state regulatory or the state fees, the different, have we become more lenient, do you think, in charging fees? Or do you think we're doing a better job and people aren't?
So this isn't a subjective fee. So this is, was it $10 for each individual license that's issued or renewed to active status. So there's been discrepancy about what license transactions should receive that $10 assessment. And I noted last year for several months that our fee was quite a bit lower than we had seen in the past, about $20,000.
Yeah, maybe I referred a decrease in the case and complaint revenues.
Oh, I'm sorry. Misunderstood your question. So in the case revenue, tell me again what you're thinking there.
Are we being more lenient on our fees that we're charging, our penalties that we're assessing, or are people just being more compliant because we've been more stern? Or
I think maybe we have a lot of things held up in formal charges authorized, which means we have a lot of people that haven't signed their consent orders, so they're not agreeing to to what the board has assessed.
I didn't know if that would be any kind of trend to look at.
Yeah.
But that makes sense.
Do you agree with that?
I would agree. While I've been filling in for Liz's role, they've asked me to really only be pushing the most urgent consumer harm cases, just because I'm at a crazy max workload. So unfortunately, that has meant cases have been sitting a little longer. We have a little bit of a backlog that we had previously started to clear. In addition, you had 2 attorneys working those cases last year, and we reduced that to 1 disciplinary counsel. So those cases are going to be moving about half as quick anyway. But that's a good observation and something to think about. Yeah.
So when you move to the second page, that's where you break down our Edison expenditures. And I break those down in my discussion of line items. So I don't know that I have anything, your largest differences as compared to last year appear to be travel and computer related items. Travel, I think the reason we're a little bit down there is it depends on where your regional meeting costs fall, because that's a June and that's our fiscal year end. So some of that falls in the following fiscal year, some falls in the fiscal year it should fall in, and I think we're able to get most of it in the prior fiscal year. I think Andy's is the only one that rolled over to this fiscal year. Plus, I think last year that was not the case. Most of it fell, so I think we actually had more in the last fiscal year than we should have, but I think that explains that. And computer related items, it's simply just being a very low number. I think that's showing a decrease there, but I don't have anything else that really is falling outside of any concerns.
During cost backs, though, Wendy, I mean, we have budgeted $254,500 for the year, and we're already through November at 133, and somewhere we're expecting that number to come in somewhere north of 300. At the end of the year, we're going to be close to 50,000 over budget, over something we don't have really any control over, right? I mean, there's not anything we can do to control.
I can only call Sarah once a week.
Do what?
I can only talk to Sarah once a week.
And I would have thought some of those allocated costs would be going down because like your staff works out of the building a lot.
So we have not been able to see any savings for that yet. We have been told that will not happen until the construction and our rehoming is done here. So we will begin to see at some point savings on rent, savings on copier leases because they're going to be shared now. Okay. So you're correct, there are some areas we're going to see some savings, not $50,000 worth, but we are going to see some.
Okay. Because I was a little disappointed that we...
The one good thing, Casey, is that we budgeted that state reg fee at $90,000, and we're not going to see that. So we've got $20,000 there likely. That will help us, but you're right. We're going to see cost backs at more than we budgeted. So being careful on some of these other line items is where.
One of the things we've been real concerned about is all the surpluses we've been generating and accumulating, and that may go away, with these cost backs and things that are happening.
Yes, and I also think one of the other things that's going up a bit is our IT, and I think I may have explained that in the last of my explanations, but our IT costs are now also being directly related to each ticket we file, we get charged for. So rather than the charges coming back to the regulatory boards and then it being, siphoned out to the boards and not being very specific, it's now we're being more specifically charged, and everyone's seeing really an increase from what I understand.
Are there any questions from anybody on Wendy's report? I don't think we need to approve this. It's for information, but if anybody's got any questions, please speak up. If not, let's go to the travel report, which we all were furnished. Comments you want to make? I mean, this is mainly informational, I believe, and no approval required. It is what it is, but does anybody have any questions on the numbers? Or Wendy, do you want to make any comments?
I just want to add one thing related to, I meant to say this in the director's report, but Sherry did do 2 state-specific ethics presentations this year. Only one required a reimbursement of any kind. But she did one for NASBA, and then she also did one for the state of Tennessee. Okay. So for a pretty big. So she did do those 2. So I just want to make sure y'all knew that.
So this is just for the 2 of y'all, and the board travel is, we would take this away from the total there and see the.
Right. So this is for the second quarter of the fiscal year.
Any other questions on travel? I guess let's move to the legislative update. Who is going to do that? Is there one?
There isn't. So I guess just we are required to make sure that you all, our session has started. I believe bill filing is the first week of February, the bill filing deadline. I know TSCPA watches that pretty closely. I also try to watch it. Legal watches it. We are advised of anything that's related to our chapter, and we have to respond accordingly. We have not seen anything to date. My understanding is bill filings have been way down so far this year, probably a new administration. There are something around 40 new legislators as well. There are new chairmen of the government ops committees on both sides, so it's a lot of new faces and that type of thing. So maybe it's going to be a quiet year. We'll see. And you all received an invitation probably from TSCPA with their legislative reception. So if you didn't get that or need any of those details, let me know.
Okay. We're down to old business. There's no old business listed, but is there any old business anybody would like to bring up? Andy.
I know that the board took up the CGMA issue, and I know that several people have been receiving emails referring to the fact that you can hold a CGMA certificate in the state of Tennessee and encouraging people to sit for the test and get their certificate. Would it be appropriate maybe for you as Chairman Casey or our executive director to maybe put something on the website that says that that the CGMA is the fact that it uses the term accountant, that it's not legal in the state of Tennessee to hold that out as a certificate? There seems to be confusion because AICPA is saying that it is okay and you can get them licensed in your firm, and then the board is sitting there saying no, it's not, and we're getting all these comments, or maybe even go so far as to put it into a newsletter to send it out to our CPAs. I know the board voted on that before I came on to go ahead and state that no, you cannot, and so, but it seems like we ought to let our people know, like informally, that hey, this is something that you cannot hold yourself out to, because I know there's some SEMA members in the state of Tennessee that actually have it on their business card and holding themselves out as a CGMA, and I don't think they know they're in violation.
You're right, Andy. The board has voted to hold it that way. I think you're within your rules and you're right. So if the board wants to put out an informal view on it, you can do that. The caution being that doesn't have jurisdiction necessarily until you go through an adjudication or a rulemaking clearly, but you can always put it on your website. You can put it in a newsletter saying, hey, you can direct them to that board meeting too. It's up on YouTube. Anyone can watch it, make a statement saying the board has at least interpreted it this way.
Sounds like a good article for the state society.
Yeah.
I think we do use the same. You can't use the term accountant.
Yeah.
And so it's
That's the
specifically
issue.
in there.
Right.
So I
That's
think
the
that is in our law.
Mhm. Yes.
So that does give us the right to state that.
Would it, I mean, in response to what the point he's brought up, would it be, can we get something on our website that just basically reinforces what our current rule and the interpretation of that rule is, or something in the newsletter the next time we put out a newsletter?
I wasn't joking about the society. That may be a good article that they could write.
Yeah, we can certainly. I mean, I would just work with legal on that. But if that's something the board would like us to do, we can do both.
Yeah, we can talk to Kevin about it.
I think you should, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding.
Farther than the CSCPA.
Well, it really affects the CMA as well.
Yeah. And maybe you need to bring that in too. I mean, if you mention CGMA, you ought to mention such as CGMA or CMA and other.
Couldn't you just do it generically and not mention?
I think people
This time
might
you're gonna
not
leave
get
somebody
it.
out.
Well, we can give examples and
Yeah.
indicate that may not be an inclusive,
Not in a
all-inclusive list.
comprehensive list. The following
Yeah.
would be.
Okay. Any other old business? Under new business, is anything that anybody wants to bring up there? I want to just mention to everybody that next meeting will be my last meeting with this board. It's funny how quickly 9 years goes by. I was pretty young when I came on this board, but it is time for me to go home. And with that in mind, we probably need to elect new officers next meeting. And I would just ask you to think about it. If you don't want to serve, you probably need to let Wendy know or whatever. And the only other observation I would have there is somewhere during my 9-year term, we elected officers for the coming year, and we happened to elect, it was either one or two individuals that did not get reappointed to the board. So you remember that, Trey? I guess you. And so in thinking about who you might choose to nominate, you might want to look at it. My term is certainly expiring. I don't know if is anybody else expiring in June?
Mine does.
I think, Judy, you are. Kevin.
And me.
It would be Pam, Kevin, Casey, and Judy.
And it may be that you would choose to wait until July to elect new officers, okay?
On that, since I came on board, that's what we've done to avoid that situation.
That would give you a better pool, but Kevin, I just want to make sure you know that I will not be here for the July meeting, so you would need to chair that meeting if that's the case.
Casey, would you not continue to serve until an appointment is placed or not?
Yes, that's what we generally do, but I am not going to do that. Yeah. There's a reason. I've got a reason.
He's drawing a boundary.
I'm not mad at anybody.
He's drawing a boundary.
But
I'm not going to clear on that.
So it may make sense to wait until July with that many people expiring. I mean, then you've got a better pool of candidates. So
Avoids the issue of running, if Stephen's willing to lead that meeting.
Yeah.
No, the July meeting. And we'll just wait till that July meeting to do the official elections.
Don't not let me off exec committee. It's like every past president.
Past president.
I'm past president from like 7 years ago.
You'll continue to be, won't you?
Yeah.
I will after this.
Okay, I've lost control of the meeting again. So that's all I had. With that said, unless somebody's got something else, we'll stand adjourned, and I hope everybody has a safe journey home.
Thank you.
All right.